All right, start recording in three, two, and one. All right, and welcome back to the Reserve Squad Midweek Show, a soccer podcast covering all things in the EPL from a bench perspective. I'm here, Spin, and this week I am co-hostless, or flying solo, as they say. Rex is busy and he can't make it this week, or maybe he just doesn't want to talk about the City and Arsenal game. No, joking aside, he just said he's really busy, and maybe he can get back with us, and we can film something on Friday to talk about, which would be good because I could still get his thoughts on what he thought about Arsenal and City, and get his thoughts maybe on what he saw with Arsenal and Chelsea, and maybe what he expects to see with Arsenal going forward. Does he think the title race is done or not? And so we'll see. But that said, it is just going to be me kind of reading off what happened. I'm going to try to fit this all in because what I want to do is I also want to recap a little bit what happened in the midweek as well. So this could be a little packed, and it's going to be a little different. Just basically talking the entire time by myself. So we'll see how that works out. But I mean, to get started, I do want to go with stick with a story of the week because one thing that really started to notice, and obviously Man City and Arsenal have been doing this for a while, where they've been basically playing their fullbacks as inverted. But it's not just Arsenal and City anymore. You're seeing Liverpool now experiment a little bit with this with Trent Alexander-Arnold. But on the weekend, maybe a surprise team to do this was Man United, because it seemed they were playing Tyrell Malacia almost in a similar kind of inverted role, a little bit more narrow, and they were making Luke Shaw kind of be the third center back and kind of going out wide that way. So I thought that was a little interesting. And then the other story to kind of talk about is Bournemouth. I think on 39 points have secured their safety, and them staying up is just a monster story considering. The third week of the season, they fired their manager, Scott Parker. They had just conceded 9 to Liverpool, and they basically rolled the dice on this caretaker, Gary O'Neill. And I'm gonna get to when we get to Bournemouth, I'm gonna spend a little bit more time on this. He's maybe my manager of the season, to be honest. Now that I said that sentimentally last week, obviously if Arteta goes on to win the EPL title, I'll have to maybe rethink that. But I mean, just considering where everyone kind of figured where Bournemouth was going to be, after that 9-0 Liverpool result, and he turned around and that team actually beat Liverpool in the rematch. He's done a remarkable job. So I mean, it's fantastic for them. I mean, I think they've won 6 wins in the last 9 games. Just absolutely incredible story. So just wanted to kind of get that out there, and then to do the midweek recap. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about all these games. I am going to talk, obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit on Arsenal and City, but I am going to also focus on what happened with Liverpool and West Ham because that actually set us up a little bit for what we saw, somewhat on Sunday, and then the Manchester United and the Spurs game was a little bonkers. So I'll maybe touch up on that as well. But I mean, it got started really. It got started on Tuesday with Leeds and Leicester. This one ends 1-1, goals from Sinistera. And maybe the unfortunate thing for Leeds was Sinistera was starting to actually heat up a little bit for them. He got a goal versus Liverpool as well, and he had to go off for injury. And that ended up kind of proving against them. And then Jamie Vardy was able to get one in the 80th minute. And one thing about that goal is Ian Nacho was basically played as a 10 in that second half, and he had a fantastic job to get to a loose ball to get it to Madison, where Madison ended up firing the final ball to Vardy making a run. And the unfortunate thing here was Ian actually hurt himself, and he might not be able to go for the rest of the way, which is important because he was really starting to come into his own. But yeah, Leeds scored first, and because that happened, frankly, this Leeds have to be kicking themselves here. Bamford also had a really big miss kind of late in the game from a close distance, so it was a really big missed opportunity for Leeds, and maybe a missed opportunity for Leicester as well, because if either team had gotten 3 points here, they would probably be sitting in a pretty good spot, and now both are going to have to sweat this out. Um, then we move on to Aston Villa and Fulham. Villa wins 1-0 with Mings getting a goal. Not a ton really happened here, so I'm gonna just move on to Wolves and Palace. Again, Wolves get the important 3 points that they were looking for, and it almost seems like they feel like they're safe on 37 because at least the way they played versus Brighton, they seemed like they had celebrated a little bit too much, which we'll get to on the weekend. So I think they maybe are right. Obviously the manager is the one going to want to talk about that, but 37 points to me feels pretty safe. Um, we move on to Chelsea and Brentford. Neither of these teams really have a lot to play for, but one of them is definitely going in a different direction than the other. Also, it's a London derby. You could say, and I mean Chelsea have really just kind of torpedoed. I don't necessarily know how much of this is on Lampard, but he did start with a weird lineup, so maybe more than you would think. Because I mean, he started Sterling as striker. He brought on Aubameyang in the second half. Aubameyang actually didn't look terrible. It'd be very interesting to see what happens with today. I think I've seen that Armando Broja might be back. Probably just start on the bench, but yeah, the front line was poor, and then no Reece James. It looks like Reece James and Mason Mount have gone ahead and gotten their surgeries done. So they'll be out for the rest of the season, and we saw Azpilicueta back in action, and yeah, just the fullbacks or wingbacks for Chelsea did not necessarily work out. And Azpilicueta has his own goal. That's not necessarily the issue here. It's just he didn't really offer anything as far as an attacking threat. There was really no help, no ways to really distribute the ball and get the ball at least to Sterling or the attacking line, and that really has been Chelsea's issue. They've had issues at the back, but they've also really struggled when it comes to ball progression, especially when Reece James hasn't been able to play. And it's a good win for Brentford. Especially I mean it's nice that Embremo gets the second goal as well because he started to have everyone has been talking about Tony and rightly so, but Embremo's had a pretty good second half of the season himself. I think he created like 3 or 4 chances in that game versus Aston Villa, and so it was good to see him get a goal here and get some recognition as well. And Brentford continued that good run of form on the weekend, which we'll get to. Though it happened late, they didn't necessarily play the best of game. And then we'll move on to West Ham and Liverpool. Liverpool go on to win 2-1. West Ham scored first with Paqueta having a pretty nice shot from distance. I think it actually surprised Allison. In this game was all about just Henderson being played and basically giving me heartburn. He actually subbed him off and brought in Thiago on, and after that the midfield actually looked quite good. Like the balance that Thiago offers with Curtis Jones on the other end was quite promising. And then unfortunately, Tago apparently has done something again to himself and wasn't able to go on the weekend, which I think we actually ended up showing up. Crazy enough. But we'll get to the Liverpool and West Ham game. That game was just bonkers. But Gakpo gets a big goal here, and it's a brilliant ball set up by Trent. I mean, I don't think this goal would have happened earlier in the season because of the positions that Trent's able to get a little bit closer in the middle of the field, and because Henderson gets the ball in that spot, he's either going out wide or he's trying to hoof something in. And Trent's able to find Gakpo's feet. Gakpo has a nice turn, and it's a good hit. I mean, the keeper maybe should do better, but it's a decent hit nonetheless. And then Kanate wasn't able to go, and so that meant Joel Matip had to step in, and step in he did. He had the important second goal with a nice header on a corner kick right before this. It looks like he should have scored before he had his shot. I guess blocked off the line. But yeah, he turned around and Liverpool had at least started to gain a little momentum. They didn't necessarily look great in this game, it's worth saying. I mean, West Ham did have some chances to counter. I mean, Bowen actually scored, it looked like, but it was called back with a really tight offsides. And then Cornet came on and almost, had a chance and just couldn't keep his things on target. I mean, there's still kind of issues with the high line. Looks like Klopp has tried to change the system a little bit, and I'm going to get to this. The way that he's made Trent. He's given Trent a new role. In a similar fashion, he's given Andy Robinson a new role. And in some cases, while it's helped Liverpool in build up and get the ball more in the final third, and they're starting to be better in front of goal, they're creating more chances. They've actually made themselves more vulnerable to be honest, with the way that Andy Robinson's been asked to do a different job, and he's struggling with that. And we definitely saw that versus Spurs. Um, and then probably the surprise of the week of the midweek was Forest beating Brighton 3-1 with Brighton getting the first goal. I mean Brighton, you expected maybe we're going to have a little bit of a hangover, considering what they went through with Man United in the FA semifinal. I mean, but they them getting the first goal, that's what made this really surprising. And then little unlucky with Pascal Gross getting an own goal. It's a really nice shot by Morgan Gibbs White, and it just kind of banks off Gross's leg. It's unfortunate, and then Danilo is able to get the important second one, and then Morgan Gibbs White is able to get the PK to finish it off towards very end, and Brennan Johnson even missed a PK earlier in the game. Yeah, it was big for Forest, and Forest apparently do seem to play a little bit different at home than they do away. I mean, we saw them actually, go at Brighton a little bit, and we did not see that necessarily versus Brentford. And I gave my thoughts on them what they did versus Liverpool, where they were just sitting back and just hoping for long throw-ins. I mean, we'll see if that necessarily works out. I mean, they do have a couple big games coming to on their schedule at home, so we'll see if they're able to get another shock result. That's probably going to be the way they stay up if they do, is they get a couple shock results by them being at home. I mean, this was definitely one of them, but they're probably going to need two more. And for Brighton, wasn't necessarily the best week for them, but they turned around and just they made amends on the weekend, which we'll get to later. And then Southampton and Bournemouth. Southampton needed this and didn't, and Bournemouth had a chance to actually get themselves dragged back into a relegation spot, and instead they went out and took 6 points versus relegation rivals. And I think by doing that, they've secured their safety, and they get the goal from Tavernier, and then they also lost Tavernier to injury. So it just kind of showed a little bit of the kind of surprise depth that they maybe have, at least, from the wide areas, because, Django Ouattara, came on, for the weekend for Bournemouth, and, created a couple assists, or at least, created two of those goals, by his play out wide. And then, Everton and Newcastle, this one was closer than what the score said. It ends 1-4, but it was 1-0 until, deep into the second half. And then, Joe Willock just kind of embarrasses Ben Godfrey. Everton have had issues all season that everyone is going to focus on. Calvert-Lewin, missing 89% or whatever of the season, but they've also had real issues at the back end. And even since Dyche has been there, he hasn't really known what to do at that right back spot. He's tried Godfrey. He's tried center backs there. He's tried Holgate there. Holgate didn't necessarily work out. I think Holgate missed this game because of a red card, two yellows with the red forced him to miss. And then versus Leicester, he tried Seamus Coleman, and that didn't necessarily. I didn't think that was working out. During that game, anyways. And then it looks like they maybe lost Coleman with a really bad knee injury, which happened yesterday. So I think going forward, they're going to have to rely on this young guy Patterson, who I thought actually impressed a little bit in the beginning of the season. When Lampard was there, and we just haven't necessarily seen him. It's possible that it's been, an injury or fitness related issue, or something else. Maybe Dyche doesn't trust his youth, but he does have legs to him. To be fair, so I'm gonna be interested to see maybe how that works, because again, Everton at least seem to be somewhat secure a little bit in midfield. It was interesting to see James Garner yesterday, and they can make things kind of difficult there. But it really is only Calvert-Lewin. Calvert-Lewin really doesn't have a ton of supply, and then at the back end, Tarkowski and Michael Keane, they can maybe do a job, defending, in the final third. Though I'm kind of skeptical a little bit more about that. But anytime you can get behind them, I mean, they just don't have pace at all, and they're vulnerable. I mean, you definitely saw that yesterday. And when this one, again, it was a chance maybe for Newcastle to slip up. It was a difficult week for Newcastle, to be honest, because Everton were also getting back, Calvert Lewin and Anana and Decore all featured in this game, and they made it hard. Similar to Forest, maybe Goodison Park is going to be a way for Everton to stay up, but again, in also a similar way to Forest, I think they're gonna need 2 wins of their final 4. The 35, that would get them to 35, 2 wins, and that's without them getting maybe a draw, but they've got Man City and I think Brighton, for the next 2 games, so maybe they can get, some magic out of a hat, but if they don't, they do end, with, Wolves who look like they've maybe kind of phoned it in. They think they're safe, and I agree with them. And then I think it's away to Palace, the final game of the season, and Palace looks safe. But at the same time, you don't know if Roy Hodgson's going to want to get his guys to show up for him and maybe to try to go out on a high note. So I mean that could be a tricky game. Away to Palace is also never really a fun place to go, Selhurst Park. So we'll see how that works out. And then Spurs and United. This one ends 2-2. It started with United actually being up 2-0. Goals from Sancho and then Rashford. Eric Dyer just allows Rashford to get the ball and carry it into the box just without even trying to have any kind of resistance. Eric Dyer was poor. He also had a chance to make amends. There was a cross floated into him. He was in the box for some reason, and he headed it wide. But Spurs were able to get back in this a little bit with Porro getting having a really nice outside the boot kind of shot, and then Son after Kane was able to play Son a goal. And the interesting thing here is Son had already missed a chance before this, but a Harry Kane was almost like playing is basically a number 10. He wasn't really playing as striker in this game. Son was kind of playing a little bit more ahead. And that really worked. I mean, Man United really did struggle with that. Another thing that was interesting was to see how uh, Eric Ten Hag did not necessarily like Wan-Bissaka, playing on that side. He hooked him and moved, brought Malacia on, moved Dallo over to that side, and I think that was maybe a mistake because that was Son ended up getting scoring on that side. It was versus Dallo when Wan-Bissaka had already been taken off. So, and it was interesting to see this week, versus Aston Villa, Dallo was back on the right back side, so Wan-Bissaka was benched. Maybe he was getting rest. I don't necessarily know. Wan-Bissaka did really well versus Matoma on Sunday versus Brighton, and they turn around and actually play Brighton again. So we'll see if Ten Hag tries Wan-Bissaka again. But that said, it seemed like Eric Ten Hag liked using Malacia as this inverted fullback last game. So if that's the case, then maybe he doesn't have plans for Dallo. I don't necessarily know. But that'll maybe be something to see. Like United's whole back line is completely shuffled because everyone knows about their injuries at the back. It doesn't seem like they've settled on fullback yet. But and that's maybe a story to follow. It's worth saying that United did have a chance to get a third. There was a really good play with Bruno, and he did everything right, but his chip ended up kind of hitting the crossbar. So unfortunate. It was maybe a dropped opportunity for Man United to kind of continue with some momentum, but they were able to get a good win versus Aston Villa on the weekend to maintain that that gap, which they have. And so they basically control their destiny with that. And then we will get to Man City and Arsenal. Um, I mean, the first goal started with Kevin De Bruyne, I think, in the 7th minute. But even before this, Arsenal had basically gotten a warning shot where Grealish had gotten the ball out wide after Haaland had found him. Grealish just one little cross into the box. Ramsdale actually spills it. Haaland kind of gets to it and basically is brought down. And it looks like Partey basically gets his body, I guess, in between before Haaland can necessarily get to the ball, or maybe he brings down De Bruyne. And it's close. I think I think Partey gets there just in time, but he almost mistimed this, and this was just in the first couple of minutes. And the interesting thing here was uh, probably within the first 5 minutes, you could have seen Arsenal were going to have issues with City's shape and trying to get to the ball, and because of that, it seemed. Arsenal started to press Man City really, really high. It was almost like they wanted to kind of, set the tempo. And what ended up happening is that played into what City basically wanted to do. Pep changed things up a little bit. He instead of doing that weird back three, maybe playing Stones as kind of an inverted uh, inverted midfielder, because they've been doing that as well. Instead, Stones was basically the center back. It really was a back four. They spread it out the fullbacks. Kyle Walker and Akanji out pretty wide. That kept the width, and then Edison was really baiting, Arsenal to kind of run at him. Edison was very good with his distribution. Arsenal just were really struggling to press Man City, and the one time where it looked like they maybe had Kyle Walker kind of pinned a little bit, he just went long to Holland, and Holland was basically able to hold, holding, not yeah, not necessarily, to use a pun. We were able to hold Rob Holding off of him. He wins the ball and kind of knocks it to Kevin De Bruyne running off him. And what Holland's done is what Holding by being so tight is he's left the space maybe where he's supposed to be. And Holland does really well to knock it to Kevin De Bruyne, kind of running behind him. Partey messes up here because Partey needs to stay with Kevin De Bruyne. There's really no protection after that point, and Gabriel is just kind of too late to engage. He's running backwards. He's not necessarily charging at De Bruyne either, and you give a guy like that that much space to run at you. Only bad things are going to happen, and Kevin De Bruyne is able to square up and basically passes it into the net with a outside the box. Ramsdale could maybe do better, but this came from again Arsenal basically kind of uh, playing themselves into a trap in some respects. I mean, Holding was weak here. Holding maybe could have done a little bit better. I mean, it was interesting to see Holding actually not afraid to at least get tight on Holland. We saw this, a little. We saw something different in the second half, which ended up hurting them as well. I mean, obviously, Man City saw that Holding was going to be a weakness, but in a way that maybe I wasn't necessarily expecting. Gabriel was equally as weak as he wasn't necessarily engaging and running back either. And really, anytime that City were able to get a run off, they looked like they were going to score. Arsenal's backline looked very very vulnerable. Um, and then again, even before the second goal that Stone scores, Ramsdale had to make a number of serious saves to keep Arsenal just in the game. Ben White had a big block before this on Kevin De Bruyne. After City basically did the same move for the first goal. Playing Holland short. Baiting Holden to come into him, and then having Kevin De Bruyne run behind him into the open space. And then a little bit after this, Holland was the one, doing a back shoulder run, with Holding ahead of him. And when Holland gets into the penalty area, but I mean, this time it's just kind of a shift. So Holding's in position here, but it's just a shift of the feet that Holland's able to escape by Holding and then get a shot away. And it draws a really good glove save by Ramsdale. And then Holland also missed one earlier, missed one out wide a little bit later with Grealish kind of playing Holland in this time. Again, Holding is completely out of the picture, and then Gabriel is just running backwards, allowing Holland to just do whatever. And they allow Holland to basically get outside top of the box, and his left foot just misses the edge of the goal. I mean, Holland basically tries to do what Kevin De Bruyne did for the first goal with his left foot and nearly pulls it off. Um, so Arsenal were just all over the place, really really struggling, and they get the second goal with I think it's maybe a little luck. I was it was it was called offsides. I thought the call was right, to be honest. I mean, another thing that was here was Holding. Looks like he was the marker here, so he loses John Stones, and Stones scores, and it just felt like it was only a matter of time before City were going to get a second or even a third. And then in the second half, it's just a really poor touch by Odegaard, just gives possession away. And at this point, Holding is really behind Gabriel by a pretty good distance. Holland gets the ball and he's able to square a ball to Kevin De Bruyne. And again, Holding is nowhere near enough to De Bruyne, and he can't make up the distance to get tight enough to stop Kevin De Bruyne's shot. And De Bruyne scores. Holding then ends up getting a goal himself. That maybe saved a sofa score, but that was not necessarily a good game for him, anyways. And then Holland finally gets his goal after setting De Bruyne up for two goals. Folding gets Holland the ball again. Holding and Gabriel kind of looked at each other, wondering if it was their fault or not. Holding runs to Foden, but can't stop Foden playing Holland the ball. And then Gabriel just isn't close enough to Holland. And I mean, the key stats were quite telling. I mean, it was just 2.5 xG, point 4 for Arsenal, 14 and 9 shots on target for City. And the 9 shots on target is wild. Arsenal just 8 shots all game, 2 on target. Possession was 52% to 48, but it was 60-40 in the first half in City's favor. And then, I mean, that really, really did show up. And then the passing was 244, 87% accuracy just to 148, 80% for Arsenal in the first half. Arsenal did not really know what to do. And it was interesting to see Arsenal's shape basically played it a little bit into what City wanted to do. And so, I mean, the thing to me was just it was interesting how lopsided this was. Hit City winning, I think you understand that really wasn't that surprising. Them doing it in this manner, I think was. I mean, Ramsdale kept this from being really ugly, but he didn't necessarily have the best game himself either, and this really wasn't competitive. And so, I mean, it's still not necessarily over. I mean, one thing I did want to ask Rex about that, but because he actually brought up I brought up if he was worried about maybe Party, coming into this game because he actually came into it with pretty bad form, to be honest. I was gonna add maybe, what his thinking was, trying Jesus over maybe Trossard or Nketiah. And Jesus didn't really have any chance to even, attack, Ederson, so this isn't necessarily on him. Though again, his positioning is sometimes makes things difficult because you don't have someone, being in the space where center backs are, it's one thing to come forward and drop into midfield, to be an extra number, but if you're not necessarily making a center back move, it doesn't really do anything. Um, but really, last week he even said that he was more worried about the defense. He called out Holding, and he was right. He knows his team. But Gabriel, I thought was his fault, equally as fault for most of these goals as well. I mean, the NBC commentators were talking about Thomas Partey, and Thomas didn't have a good game. But I do think the bigger culprits were their center backs, and I think maybe the other take I had was. Um, it was a fantastic job by Holland just kind of recognize how Holding was playing him. I mean, you saw him actually dropping deeper to basically bait him to come with him, and Holding was obliging, and the Arsenal were not ready for Kevin De Bruyne making runs, behind him. I mean, but the positioning hurt in the second half as well, uh, because it just didn't seem whatever Gabriel was doing, Holding was never doing the same thing. Holding was kind of doing his own. Kind of his own show. So usually you want your back line to kind of be even with each other, and instead Holding was kind of a maverick a little bit. He would either run to Holland and try to be on his back shoulder to be really really tight, or he'd like really lay off and be super back. And it just seemed the back line was just really out of sync. But you know I'm looking at this and I'm thinking maybe it wasn't the best idea for Arsenal to go with one holding midfielder and to play basically, sometimes he allows Shaka to kind of, play a little bit back in a pivot, or he has Zinchenko. But Zinchenko had to do a job at fullback. City were really good job, did really well at keeping that width. So you were able to play, you take Zinchenko, out of the game that he would have necessarily wanted to. And so at that point, where the Shaka's role was really important. And instead of staying, close to Partey, Shaka was oftentimes being baited to go out and press a little higher up in the pitch. And so, really, oftentimes it was just Kevin De Bruyne and Party, and no one else. So I was just wondering if maybe looking back, obviously hindsight, 50-50 and whatnot, or 2020 or whatever it is. This could have been a game to try Jorginho and Party together in a double pivot and basically clog up the middle of the field to at least take away a little bit of what City wanted to do. We'll see if Real Madrid take cues because they've been trying Tony Cruz in the Champions League as that number 6, and I think they could do the same thing if they just try Tony Cruz um, in midfield by himself. Yeah, that's probably going to be a game that you needed to chew a mini. Maybe find a way to kind of compact, that middle, close it off a little bit. And then with Holding, yeah, if they don't get Saliba, I don't really know what to necessarily do. Yeah, they did bring in this guy Kiwar, who struggled in his first debut for Sporting, but I mean, maybe it's time to see what he can do. I don't necessarily know. Another point to say is, and Man City looks like Brighton here. just the way they were passing for the back and the way that they were looking for Holland, and the way Holland was immediately laying balls off and finding teammates. This is what Ferguson does with Brighton. And another thing to see was I was curious to see. I thought maybe Arsenal were going to have an advantage, maybe with Saka being able to run at Laporte, and instead, Pep played a Kanji there at left back instead, and I think the one thought I had was if Arsenal or if Man City do go on to kind of win the double, maybe not just win the Premier League, win the FA Cup or even win the Champions League, we can all blame Dortmund. And it's not just because of Holland, because them signing Akanji has played so much more than I think I would have expected. And he's helped out when at center back when Stones has been injured, and that's allowed City to kind of do this. Uh, but he can play. Ake's out right now, and insert Akanji into left back, and he looked incredible in this game. I mean, again, it really was almost like a 4-2-4. With Gundogan and next to Rodri, and Kevin De Bruyne kind of having a free run at this with Holland. And yeah, again, Arsenal just weren't ready for what hit them. Um, and yeah, I guess that pretty much is it. It's interesting to see Man City without Kevin De Bruyne. Um, and one thing that's interesting is Pep has tried to limit his minutes a little bit in some of these games, and maybe you see why. I mean, it's easy to forget how good he can be, and he always, especially in these big games, he seems to just kind of show up. And the only thing you can think of is when maybe Pep regrets having to take him off. Um, Last year versus Real Madrid, because it almost coincided when Kevin De Bruyne came off. City were a different team, and then in the Champions League final, a couple of years back with Chelsea, Rudiger ended up kind of injuring Kevin De Bruyne and wasn't able to go. And you saw Man City weren't able to score a goal in that game, and so Kevin De Bruyne in Holland is such a wild cards that sometimes Pep's players can play almost like a machine football. You need someone to at least be a little individual, but kind of take a risk here and there, and that's what Kevin De Bruyne offers them, and that mix is quite good. And then we saw what we saw on the weekend. That mix with Alvarez and Holland is equally quite good. So, anyways, I mean, I was going to ask Rex, what he thought about the title race. I mean, City still have to beat Brighton. So that's that'll be a hard game. We don't necessarily know when that'll be rescheduled. And then Everton away to Everton is sandwiched between the Madrid games. So there's maybe a chance for City to drop points there. But I mean, I'm kind of just I'm grabbing straws a little bit. And even then, Arsenal are going to have to handle their own business, and they've got a game with Brighton as well, and then away to Newcastle is not going to be fun for them either. And then away to Nottingham Forest could be really tricky. So we'll see how that works out. And then so that is that. And then we'll move on to what happened on the weekend. I'll start with Liverpool and Spurs. The first goal from Curtis Jones, and then Luis Diaz, and then Salah PK, all in like the first 20 minutes. Um, and it looked like it was going to maybe a repeat of what we saw with Man United early in the season. Oh, it's going to be another 7-0 type game, and then no. Andy Robinson had a weird 10-minute stretch where he kept losing the ball and giving it in really bad areas, and a few times where Liverpool were actually able to kind of get away with this. Allison had to make a really big save, I think, on Kulishevsky, and then Virgil van Dijk was able to actually clear a ball off the line. But those were the warning shots, and then Spurs woke up. Um, Harry Kane is able to head the ball in. It's almost a free header. We'll get to this. There's an issue a little bit with the way that Liverpool are playing Robertson, and they're basically turning him into a left center back in a back three. And so that means he's got more duties defending crosses in the air than necessarily being out wide to try to stop crosses from coming in. And Robinson's struggling with that. He's also struggling in build-up. His role in the past has been to just kind of get the ball and run, carry it up the wing, and then try to get a cross off. Uh, it seems they're kind of trying to switch that around a little bit, and he's really struggling. And we saw that specifically in the second half, but also a little bit in the first. And then Son's able to to make it a one goal game in the second half, 3-2. Son was getting behind Liverpool's back line really the entire game, so it felt it was only a matter of time. I think Son actually is Klopp's maybe favorite player that isn't on Liverpool. He's spoken about that before, so that was fitting as well. And it's just a easy ball over the top. We'll get to that later on. Liverpool's midfield is still kind of an issue, and then the way that Kanate is kind of forced to be either the right back or be next to Van Dijk in the middle is also giving them fits. So in this case, it was a big problem with Perisic being a wing back able to draw Kanate a little bit over, and so more times than not, it was kind of Son versus Virgil van Dijk, and Virgil doesn't really have the legs to do that anymore, unfortunately. And then, but it's still still 3-2. It's still fine. And then uh, James Milner came on in the second half, and he immediately makes a really bad foul, giving away free kick, and lo and behold, Richarlison scores on the free kick. I mean, at this point, I was just kind of cursing, cursing at my phone, cursing at the sky because Milner came on. I don't understand why Klopp's still bringing him on, especially in a big game. Um, and it's his fault, for a lot of this. I mean, it's a fantastic delivery by Son again, which was unfortunate. And then Richarlison of all people, not just because he played for Everton, but when he was an Everton player, um, he nearly slapped Thiago's leg in half, and that was the game that Virgil van Dijk got hurt as well. And so and he was never really remorseful about it. He almost like bragged about it. And then again, I kinda figured all was lost, and then, at the very end, Diego Jota was able to escape basically save Klopp from what I thought maybe a disaster show. Um, but yeah, I mean, my first thought was, "Oh, this is gonna be, similar to the 7-0 United game," and instead, I really got a repeat of the Newcastle game when they were up 2-0, had a red card, and then played the second half praying for the whistle to end, praying for their dear life, when Newcastle, were only with 10 men. It felt very similar to that. It had to be Richarlison's, the scoring, which I already mentioned, and then, I feel like this is a theme where Diego Jota saves Klopp's bacon, um, because we'll kind of get to this, later on. I think Klopp's decisions in the second half were really poor. He brought on Henderson and Miller on together again, and again, one of these days I'll actually try to look this up and to see what it would be. I have a feeling if Henderson and Milner were forced to play together in midfield and start a whole season, I think that team would be relegated. It's just the way that Liverpool just seem to drop points when that happens. More times than not, and then. So that's kind of setting it up. I mean, the issue. I mean, the starting 11 was interesting. To see Luis Diaz back, and Luis Diaz was fantastic. He not only did he get a really nice goal, just his overall the touches that he has, the pace that he's able to run the ball and cut, is definitely something that's been missed. You think about how sometimes Liverpool have struggled against low blocks. One way to kind of beat that is just have someone beat a man 1v1, maybe on the wing, and that's what Diaz has in his locker. Um, and it was interesting to see maybe Elliott and Curtis Jones, tried together, and at least in that first half, I somewhat liked this. Again, the issue can be, sometimes Curtis and Robinson were pressing the same person, and that was kind of being an issue. Another thing that was showing up was the change in system is making you're going from that left midfielder that was basically kind of being a second pivot guy, next to Fabinho, especially that was more maybe be cover for Robinson, more defensive minded. He's gotten a more of attacking role. So what Curtis is good at pressing. He gets a good goal, is worth saying, but that miscommunication with Robinson and Jones was creating issues, and that actually I think led to the Son goal, or at least led to a chance that Son had. And then Salah, Gakpo, and Diaz as the front line. I mean, It's hard to be critical because Gakpo uh, forced had the clever touch that drew the PK, and Gakpo had the important assist for the second goal. But the way that Gakpo is dropping back and basically trying to be a number into midfield, I think he's hurting them more than helping. I would have preferred either Jota starting there or even Darwin Nunes, to be honest. And it seems Klopp's kind of fallen in love with the false nine idea again, and I'm a little nervy about that. And then with Spurs, um, not a ton of changes here. The main thing was it looks like they switched formations a little bit and played with wingbacks in the second half, and you know that was when we saw Perisic actually be a little bit more influential and really hurt them. Poro didn't necessarily have his best game either, but what happened was the progression responsibilities fell on Kulishevsky, and Kulishevsky was got a little bit more dangerous as the game went on as well. And then instead of seeing Son tried as like a winger or trying to be someone to try to come to the ball and be a playmaker, we saw Son almost as like their striker, or playing next to Kane, in that second half, and that really worked well. Um, but I mean, I do want to touch a little bit on what happened, with the goals. I mean, it's just for the first goal, it's just Salah getting the ball, what kind of play to him by Trent Alexander-Arnold, who sends in a really good delivery, and Trent hits the ball first time, sending the ball over everyone, and it goes to an unmarked Curtis Jones. And Trent's had like 6 assists in his last 6 games. This new role has definitely helped him out. But this play really starts with Fabinho passing Trent Alexander-Arnold the ball, around the halfway line, and then Trent sends the ball to Salah, who does a one-time a loop pass to find Gakpo. It's an insanely good pass by Salah, and then after that, Gakpo and Curtis were able to help Liverpool keep the ball, and that allowed Liverpool to get their numbers, into the box when Trent can send the ball in. And this really shouldn't cause that much danger, but Pedro Porro and Romero zero in on Luis Diaz making a run. No one marks Curtis Jones. Kurlishevsky, I think, has blame here. Um, and then it's a pretty good finish by Curtis Jones because I think he takes it first time because Porro does make a recovery at the very end. So if he tries to bring this down, I think it's blocked. And it's not the easiest thing to volley with your weak foot. And then for the second goal, it's a fantastic finish by Diaz, and it's an athletic finish because I think the ball is behind him. But the sequence of one-touch passing from Trent to Fabinho, Elliott, and Salah is something we just haven't seen all season. And it's a ridiculously good pass by Gakpo, or to Gakpo, sent in by Salah, who creates this goal with that pass. And then Gakpo, has a nice run and does very well to get the ball and before it goes out of bounds, and has a good cross to Diaz. Like, this is Gakpo when he's in the box. Can be quite good. I just feel like we don't necessarily see it as more as I would like to. That maybe is what Klopp is asking him to do. There's this whole fascination with finding another Firmino. I mean, Firmino, what made him unique was his ability to press, not necessarily to be a playmaker from deep. In fact, we didn't necessarily see that till later in his years. He was normally in the box with Salah and Mane. He wasn't always behind. That just happened when Firmino kind of lost his legs a little bit. So I would like to see Gakpo a little bit more of a presence in the box when Liverpool have the ball. But we'll necessarily see. And then the third goal again comes from just a PK that Salah scores. It's good to see Salah convert the PK because he's missed his last two. And then Gakpo again, you see what he can be, in the box. He does a very clever two touch to get around Romero who drags him down. So Gakpo was at heart for two of these goals. And then the problem started. 3-0, you think the game's over, and then Robertson started being really poor on the ball and losing it. Kane fed a through ball to Son, and this was when Van Dijk had the clearance. But Harry Kane gets a goal by seconds later, so it doesn't really matter. But this is really good play by Spurs. They bait Liverpool here. So what they do is they put a few passes together, avoid Liverpool pressing them, and then after they get Kanate to commit out of position, Perisic is able to run down the wing unmarked, and it's a really good forward ball by Oliver Skip, and and Perisic then gets beaten by Van Dijk here, and this play was worrying to me, which I'll get to because. But then, Perisic floats a really good ball to Kane, and it's an easy header because both Virgil and Kanate are out of the play. So it's really just Robertson in the box, and Kane's going to win that all day. And it was similar to me to what to the goal that Arsenal scored with Gabby Jesus, a couple weeks ago when Kanate was forced out of the picture, drew in to try to block Martinelli. Martinelli sent the ball in, and Gabriel Jesus was able to head the ball over Robinson. But Liverpool up 3-0 at this point. Why are they playing such a high defensive line? And why is Kanate committing to Son that high up the field? But another thing that was concerning is, Van Dijk did a good job to recover on Perisic, but he's running full speed. And once Perisic basically just tried to cut around him, it looked like Van Dijk's knee gave out on him. He slipped as well, so maybe that was just it. But it was a concerning moment. Um, I mean, I remember especially when he's on that side, that right side has been an issue for him because Mitrovic was able to get by him the first game of the year, kind of doing something similar. When it looks like he struggles to put pressure on that side. So that's maybe something to follow going forward, and especially with the way that Liverpool like to play a high line. That's going to bring a conversation that no one wants to have. Anyways, but it didn't stop there. I mean, chance after chance were coming in Spurs' way after this. I mean, there was another hard, bad giveaway by Robertson. This is when Allison's able to save on Kulishevsky. And then Van Dijk does well here to at least sprint back and force, make the shot hard as possible on Kulishevsky. So that's what's saying as well. But, the first half, Liverpool have 3 goals, but I think they only had 3 shots on target. Uh, so that's where I get to. Whereas Gakpo he helps you, but he can also kind of hurt the offense a little bit because too often when Salah or Diaz was getting the ball on the wing, there was no one near. There was no kind of threat into the box. Gakpo was behind the play too much, or Curtis Jones and Elliott were kind of having issues as well. So there's still again, sometimes you can expect growing pains trying a new system, but that was showing up. Um, but in the second half, things didn't necessarily change for Liverpool. Everything still went Spurs' way. And Son hit the post. And here's another issue that I had. So Liverpool again is playing a really high defensive line, and then Robinson get caught upfield trying to press and win the ball back. And Spurs pass around him. They get the ball to Kulishevsky ahead of Robinson, who then sends a perfect angled ball to Son, making a run. And Son does everything well here but score. And then, a little bit after that, Romero hit the post. Harry Kane floats a ball into the box this time. It goes over Robinson, which is again a problem. And then Romero has a really good flick on and Allison doesn't even move. Just ball just kind of hits the post. But 3-2, Son does get the second goal to make it 3-2 in the 77th minute. 3 other things are fine, but and again, Liverpool are trying to attack. What they do is they allow themselves to be counted on because this is what Spurs were kind of fine to do. Salah misplays a pass. Spurs immediately switch the field to where there's absolutely no one on the right side of the field. Henderson had to come on at this point, and he's supposed to be kind of the right midfielder, and he's not. He's kind of playing more centrally, and what that means is there's just absolutely because Kanate is like a fake right back or not. He's also playing center back. There's just no one on that right side. So really, it's Salah has to run all the way back. But so Perisic gets the ball. He decides to hold up though, and finds Romero in the field. And then Romero is able to look up and play a really nice ball lofted over the top that finds Son making a well-timed run behind Liverpool's back line again. And Robinson is keeping it on sides. And Kanate is just caught being too far away. Kanate, I think, was more concerned about what Perisic was about to do. And so again, there are ways where the system can still be an issue. And then Son, beats Allison. And then for the third goal, there's not a ton to talk about other than the Milner foul. And then with the fourth goal on Jota, it's a hopeful ball by Allison, but it's a poor pass and it's a poor pass decision by Lucas Moura. But I want to get to this because a lot of people were going after Lucas Moura, at least online that I saw. I put this on Romero and Dyer, allowing Jota to run behind them. Jota keeps his composure and has a really good touch and finish with his weak foot. Um, but Spurs are a mess here. But the thing that's worth saying is Jota anticipates that maybe Lucas is going to make a bad decision to try to pass backwards or try to have a heavy touch because you actually see him moving. He's in motion when it looks like Lucas Moura is about to trap the ball. If he's not, I think Romero is able to necessarily is able to get there maybe before him. So it's good on Jota there to just kind of instinctually kind of maybe sense something could maybe happen. Another thing too is Romero possibly could have brought Jota down before he had gotten into the box. It would have been a red card. You would have had to eat it, and you would have been able to at least get a point. And so, um, that's kinda setting it up. I mean, the reason why some of the thoughts that I had is, why wasn't this game over, at 3-0? Would this have happened to Pep's, Man City? And, it's feast and famine when Liverpool play this high defensive line. This has been kind of an issue, with Klopp over the years is and we saw this in the beginning of last season when Liverpool had a number of 2-0 leads and they ended up kind of letting teams get back, to get 2-2 draws. Um, and it just seems they don't really have a way to adjust how to kill a game. And this is where maybe missing Thiago would have really helped out because it's either get the ball out wide, get the ball out quickly to the attackers, have them try to beat a man, try to create something, and instead it just wasn't necessarily coming off. But a few really poor moments by Robinson allowed Spurs to kind of threaten the goal and get some confidence up. And when a team's down 3-0, maybe that's sometimes all you need. Where they were like they probably went into halftime saying we can maybe still go at this team, and especially Son. Son kept finding ways to make his runs on sides and kept trying to play off him. And when you counter press, you have to stop the ball from being accurately sent in. Liverpool were failing to do that. They also failed to keep the ball. So Spurs basically stopped pressing them. They played in a bit of a deep block, and they just allowed Liverpool to have the ball. And they just figured, yeah, the second you lose it, that's when we'll break. And Liverpool weren't able to handle that. So again, Thiago's missed too many games for me. His and every time he's missed, it's showed up, and it's been really, really unfortunate. But I do think this was maybe on Klopp too. He should have seen the way that Spurs were playing, and after getting after a couple balls, just kind of beating his line, and told him to settle down. Maybe even stop Trent from playing in midfield, and maybe be they should have been a little bit more compact. I thought, especially after Spurs scored the second goal, and just nothing really changed. And the stats were telling either. Also, I mean, the XG was Liverpool 2.2, to Spurs 2.03. Shots were 12 and 4 for Liverpool. Only 4 shots on target, and there was 7 shots and 3 on target in the first half. Both sides with 4 big chances. Spurs had 10 shots and 7 on target. I mean, Liverpool obviously had majority of possession, 68%. It was 73% in the first half, though. And then obviously Liverpool had 600-ish passing to Spurs, not really having many passes at all. But they didn't really care. They just when Spurs got the ball, they were looking for where the space was. When Liverpool had the ball, Spurs were already kind of already settled in. So I think it was unfortunate for Liverpool not to necessarily try to keep the ball because Spurs had to come at you, with it being 3-0, and instead Liverpool kind of baited themselves. I mean, for the positives though, I think that Yoda he has to feature in Klopp's starting 11 from this point forward, especially with him fit. His instinct is just to know where to be in the box, and his ability to get shots off on target under pressure is as good as anyone else on the team. Salah included, and I feel like the offense struggles when he's on the bench. Um, and, he was unlucky maybe not to score 2 goals versus West Ham, in the midweek as well. Maybe that's why, he actually started on the bench this game. But and the way I look at it is he was in position to have those chances. So many times Darwin and Gakpo haven't had that problem. So I look at that as maybe more of a bonus. I mean, solid score in the PK, and he's on pace for 20 goals in the EPL, and I think he's got 26 in all competitions with 7 assists as well. And he had 8 goals and 8 assists in the Champions League. So it wasn't necessarily bad for an off year. And then Curtis Jones is very hit and miss. He shows some promise, but he can be a workhorse in midfield. But he's weak on passing the ball. And again, you're going especially when you're going from Thiago to someone like Curtis Jones. That's a big change. So just there's been a lot of change, not just with Trent kind of playing a different position, Robinson playing a different position, that left midfield having a different role as well, and it's sometimes causing some issues, unfortunately. But the main thing is to focus on the negatives. Is Robinson has basically turned into a left center back, at least when Liverpool have the ball, and the two bad giveaways is just him having the ball at his feet and struggling a little bit in build up. I think that can be fixed. The issue to me is more he's going to have more uh, responsibilities defending crosses in the air, and especially when Kanate is drawn out. So When the ball is all a team has to do is find a way to either get Kanate out of position or to send a ball that beats Van Dyke. And teams will fancy Robinson in the air. And I hate saying it because Robinson has been one of my favorite players, maybe my favorite player, to be honest. Just I've loved the way he's always just kind of bombed forward and always had he's exemplified what Klopp likes to play with. High energy, high intense, and if they're going to change to this kind of system long term, they're going to have to maybe think about trying Simikas instead, or honestly, Kanate left center back, and maybe Gomez right back or right center back. So to try to move them over, or maybe even try Gomez and that left center back spot because you're not really playing with fullbacks anymore. At least in possession, everything's kind of shifted a little bit. And maybe that would be better with Virgil van Dijk being the center back, but the responsibility has changed. And personally, I'm iffy on this because all of this is done to fit Trent in midfield, and this is really done because you're trying to find a way to take the responsibility off, someone like Henderson or someone that's playing in that right central midfielder. So a lot of this is basically done to fix that issue, but it's changed other things. So I think it's a good example that you can't really out tactic where you are weak on the field. So Klopp moving Trent into midfield means Kanate is the right center back, and when he's forced to defend out wide, that means Virgil van Dijk no longer has Kanate to help him out through the middle. So teams can maybe run at Van Dyke, which we saw with Son doing, and then Robinson can be exposed, which I mentioned as well. So again, and Klopp is doing this because he's so weak in midfield. That's why he's got to play Trent in a different position. I think you can maybe get away with still playing four at the back and doing something we saw similar to what we saw versus Man United. Maybe try Joe Gomez as just a right back, as a standard right back. You play Trent next to Fabinho, still in midfield, and then you could still play with double tens and still play with attacking with attackers with the two strikers, Salah, Jota, Salah, Darwin, Salah, Luis Diaz, things like that. Maybe play Gakpo underneath them. That would maybe fit what Klopp is trying to do a little bit better than what this is because this is giving him problems. It seems like Klopp's tried to copy what City's done with Pep or Pep's done with City, and the issue is Akanji, Kyle Walker, John Stones, they're Nathan Ake, Diaz are more apt to play that style. Pep has Rodri as opposed to where Liverpool have Firmino. Rodri, Firmino, for all his traits that helps you out when it comes to no being a holder or being some kind of midfield protection. He doesn't have the ball progression that Rodri has, so it's different. It's if Pep is trying to copy or if Klopp is trying to copy Pep, it's not going to necessarily work. He doesn't have the same profiles. And then again, I feel like Jota needs to start over Gakpo and Darren. I mean Diaz when fit, I would like to maybe even see him at the left wing spot. So again, I think I said it last week. I would like to see Diaz, Jota, and Salah to see if that would maybe work out a little bit more. And then I mentioned how Klopp falling in love with the false nine again. I'm a little wary of that. But it's because especially in his heydays, in the special years, his bugaboo were also always going against low block sides. He basically had a team that was built to handle being pressed, win the ball back up high, and then get the ball to kind of Salah and Mane to kind of do something individually brilliant, and maybe being set up by Bobby. And he's got that in Diaz and Salah still. But I feel like Jota can be someone that can maybe be his I don't know Pep Aguero if Klopp plays him that way. And it is harsh because Gakpo has been playing well, but I think until Gakpo ends up switching from trying to play, um, trying to basically have two roles in one, where he's a number in midfield to help with build up and also get the ball in the box later on. I'd like to see Gakpo trying to play off the ball a little bit more, trying to pass for center backs because I think he's like 6'4". Try to play. Try to copy a little bit what Newcastle's done with Alexander Isak, to be honest. And then I mentioned how I'd like to maybe see a back four, but That is what, that's where we are. I mean, it was a big call to see, Klopp actually sit Henderson. I did like seeing that, though he brought him on, so that didn't necessarily do anything. Um, and maybe if there is some good news here, it does seem like maybe Milner's time will be up. There's maybe talks that, they won't be extending him, so and maybe this talks that Brighton actually wanna bring him in, which, maybe he can be, good for the locker room, good for vibes. He just can't see the midfield, or he just can't see the field anymore, especially in a starting role. Um, and, really, he can maybe do a job, makeshift job. If you need someone, he can be a utility knife, in moments, in situations he can work out, maybe, at a fullback spot. But yeah, I mean, Brighton don't necessarily run as much as Liverpool. Maybe he would necessarily work a little bit in a pivot role. I don't necessarily know what Brighton would see in him, to be honest. But frankly, Liverpool will improve if basically they just go from Milner being an option next year to making Henderson kind of the new Milner, and then making Bachacic, and even if it's something like if they have to use Curtis Jones, Harvey Elliott, or even the new kid or the young kid at Leighton Clarkson, or Tyler Morton. If even if it's something like that, I'd prefer Liverpool actually go out and do some other business, but. Um, that is where they're at. It doesn't seem like they're going to be getting, Jude Bellingham, at least for the time being. There's weird talks that, maybe he's off to Madrid, maybe he's actually gonna extend, a year at Dortmund, which would actually that would make this a saga, last another year. But if that's the case, Liverpool might have, at least if they've saved up money, for at least a Jude bid, that means they can maybe sign, 2 midfielders. So someone to look at. They need legs in midfield, so someone like Manuel Ugarte, or obviously a Casado, even a Roman Lavia, is worth looking at. I think Lavia is still quite young. Ugarte is young in Sporting, but I really liked what I saw when he played Arsenal in in Europa League. He's a dual monster. In general, he was setting records, for Spurs in the Champions League. But he's also like really good on the ball. He would be something that I would definitely like to see. And then maybe a creative play like Subwashai. Um, and I don't necessarily know if they're linked to him or not. But that would be, if you're gonna miss on Bellingham, that would maybe be the way I would go. Also, I don't necessarily know what the idea is to do with Tiago, because when he misses, they don't really have someone that can be a controller, that can make the possession, that can make passes, um, being under pressure. And they struggle a little bit with that. You basically, you making Trent the new Tiago with this new change. But again, there's maybe, I don't necessarily know who would even be on the market to bring in a new Tiago. So, well, there's still some issues. It's not going to be an easy rebuild. And then with Spurs, it's good for them to bounce back in back-to-back games. It's interesting to see them play. It's interesting to see what Ryan Mason is doing. But again, the back line is shambolic. Eric Dyer, I think, should have retired in the midweek, and I don't think he was good in this game as well. And then, it was interesting to see the tactical change. So that's good for Mason, because it did seem by them playing with wingbacks, getting Perisic more of a threat on the ball, getting Kulishevsky to drop into midfield instead of having the holding and having Oliver Skip and Hoiberg to be kind of a to have responsibilities being on the ball. I think that made them a little bit better, but it's the same old story, I think, for Spurs, unfortunately, where you have Son and Kane being absolutely brilliant, but they're being kind of let down by what's in the back line and what's in midfield. And so, um, I mean, Kane was even playing in midfield almost versus Man United, and in the second half on the midweek. And then again, yeah, I think Eric Dyer and Romero are being lazy for that Jota goal. And so, I mean, despite that start, Spurs are unlucky here. I mean, they hit the post 3 times. They forced Allison a number of 1v1 saves. And then, before the Jota goal, they were actually forced to play down a man because Ben Davies had to go off the pitch, in the final minutes for like a bleeding lip. And maybe the goal doesn't happen with if Ben Davies is back there. Maybe he would have had a better head on his shoulder than Dyer and Romero. And then There were a couple instances where it came to VAR decisions, or I guess ref decisions, because Klopp ended up kind of melting down over Paul Tierney. Um, and Spurs man, Brian Mason, was a little upset that Jota wasn't sent off for a high kick. I think Jota maybe could have been sent off for a high kick. That one is a little bit 50-50 to me. I think the foul early in the first half, before Spurs even had their comeback. There's a really bad challenge on Luis Diaz where Oliver Skip. It's almost an ankle breaker. I was surprised that wasn't looked at as maybe a red card. So I think no, neither side had necessarily have something to complain about. So I think that ended up working out okay. And then we'll move on to Fulham and Man City. Allen gets a goal in the first and basically the 3rd minute with a PK. Vinicius then gets one back to make things a little bit interesting for Fulham, and then Alvarez has an insane, unworldly shot for the second goal. And we'll get to that a little bit. I mean, maybe the main story was Kevin De Bruyne. Um, being rested. We got to see a different city. I mean, they still win, but it wasn't necessarily what we've been used to them, and it was a tricky game. It was it was at an away ground. After a giant midweek result, it would have been easy to have it, let up a little bit. And then for Fulham, unfortunate news here is Tim Kaine is responsible for the PK, and then later, I think they said he fractured his arm later in the game, so that looks like he could maybe be this season for him. But I want to touch on a little bit before what happened for the PK because it's just a long ball by Kyle Walker, to the field to Jack Grealish, who's on the other side of the field. Grealish cuts in and sends a really good ball into the box. It finds Mahrez, and then Mahrez just a cutback, which finds Alvarez, and then Ream brings him down. But the cheek thing here is Alvarez is making it a size run, shattering Holland. I mean, Pereira is lazy and doesn't really mark Alvarez, and that's a problem as well. But Alvarez recognizes well, Holland is drawing attention. Maybe I'll just kind of be behind him, and he uses Holland almost like a decoy. And it's not the first time we've seen that happen. And then Fulham for Fulham's goal, City started off with like 87% possession in this game, but they still found a way to get back into the game by going long. Harry Wilson kind of has a nice header down to Vinicius, running behind him, and it's a really good finish by Vinicius. And then there were a couple chances for City to get a second goal. They're both falling to Grealish, and Holland maybe could have had 2 assists in this game. But he set Grealish up on really 2 really nice chances, and he's starting to get underrated in his ability to set teammates up to score, which is not necessarily the best development there. But they do get the second goal with a very very good goal by Alvarez. Um, I mean, Harry Wilson is kind of pushed off the ball by Akanji, so to win the ball back, get the ball to Alvarez, who looks like he has defenders all over him. But he does a clever drag back to avoid them, and then pops a shot that dips and curls into the far post from like 25 out. And then that pretty much wins City the game. I mean, there are a couple shouts here. Haaland had a chance. Alvarez had a chance that were forced some pretty good saves by Leno. And then maybe the main talking point was Ederson came up big on Vinicius. It looks like Fulham were able to go long and kind of force City into some issues again. Ederson basically clattered into Ruben Diaz, and it looked like Ederson had made a mistake here, but he's able to get a hand on the ball and kind of get it away before bringing Vinicius down. And in real time, it looked like it maybe could have been a BK, but Ederson gets his hand on the ball first before uh, anyone's dragged down. But the main thing with City is you mentioned it earlier, but because Walker Diaz and Akanji seem just better to suit the style, it's unique that they're doing a Trent's role for City with their center back in John Stones. I mean, their buildup is what creates the goal because it starts with them having the ball, at their feet, and just Fulham weren't able to necessarily get anywhere near them. Um, and the interesting thing here is. City do what they needed to do. I mean, up next is maybe a tricky game with West Ham. We'll necessarily see how that works. West Ham were embarrassed on the weekend, so at least maybe not necessarily score wise, but at least performance wise, they were not necessarily good. And then it's Leeds on the weekend. So we'll see how that's at least how it sets up before the Real Madrid game, and then they have away to Everton. So we'll see how City handle this. I mean, the stats were favorable to Man City. But maybe the disappointing thing here is, at least from a neutral, is it's starting to look like when Pep wants to, Holland and Julian Alvarez can not only play together, they complement each other. There's a lot of interesting things said in the beginning. Why are you signing two number nines? Why are you sending out Sterling and Gabby Jesus? And I was kind of a part of that. I was surprised by that too because I was like, well, you only play with one nine usually. Grealish isn't necessarily a winger. You don't really, are you going to rely on Mahrez or Bernardo Silva? They aren't really wingers either. And it's turned out Pep maybe I guess understood what he was doing after all. Um, but City maybe dropped this point or dropped these points without having Alvarez, coming in to play, in Kevin De Bruyne instead, giving him a game off because it's not just the wonder goal, he draws the PK as well. And it's just his positioning in the box is good. He's similar. He reminds me of Jota, like his movement. He also reminds me a little bit of Aguero. Them both being Argentine, I guess, kind of, and maybe in a similar build, and obviously both the City that you kind of drawn to make those comparisons, but just he's not. It seems like he can be. He doesn't really have a weakness. Now he's only gotten eight or 10 starts, and I think he's already got 8 goals for the season. But the interesting thing is, he can make a run in on back shoulder. We saw what he was doing for Argentina. He can make forward runs that way. When he gets the ball, he can be clever on it. He can. He had a couple moments where he was able to kind of spin someone, kind of that was getting tight on him. Um, so he's got a little wiggle with him. He can dribble the ball, and he's got good vision. I think he sets up a Holland attempt by getting the ball on the sideline, spinning around someone, and then basically firing a ball across the other side of the field with his left foot to get it to get to Grealish, and then Grealish kind of squares it to Holland. So his all around play is quite good, and you imagine it's only going to get better. And then Holland's on 34 goals through 30 games, and this is insane. Rex and I kind of talked about it, earlier in the year. We figured he'd basically be up there for Golden Boot contender. The cheek thing we said is he scored a goal a game, for Dortmund, and basically he's doing the same thing in the EPL. He's doing the same thing with City, and so yeah, gulp. And then for the maybe the negatives is Vinicius did kind of get to them a little bit. Ruben Diaz did won't necessarily be upset to not see him again. And Man City still have to deal with maybe Ferguson or Welbeck. We'll see. Obviously, they have to deal with Benzema and potentially Calvert Lewin and Antonio. Coming up on Wednesday, who can all of them can be physical and do similar things that Vinicius was doing. So maybe the idea is just try to go long and try to get lucky that way. Don't even try to press to play through City's lines. See what you can get lucky that way. I mean, you're only going to have 20% of the ball anyway, so why not try to be direct and see if you can maybe get Diaz or to make a mistake or Kanji or someone, especially if Stones is being played out of position in midfield. Usually he would be someone to defend back there. So that's maybe something to say. We did see Pep go back to a back four versus Arsenal, and it was interesting to see him change shape against Fulham. I don't know if he was that was maybe a way of Pep saying he respects Arsenal. I mean, that's probably what we'll see versus Real Madrid, but who knows? That was interesting to see. And looking back, the summer window for Man City was weird. They sold Zinchenko and Gabby Jesus to rivals. They sold Sterling to Chelsea. They brought in Holland, Alvarez, and at the last minute they brought in Akanji, who's played way more than we were expecting. And then with Fulham were never really into the game, and the possession was quite damning. But and Man City were playing a reshuffled squad in a little bit, but Fulham had a man advantage versus Man City earlier in the season. I think it was before the World Cup, and City had like 80% possession, even playing down a man. So at least this is an improvement for Fulham. And then it sucks for Tim Ream, not just because he's American. He's had one of the better center back seasons of anyone in England this year, World Cup included. So that is a little bit gutting. And Fulham have Liverpool up next, so we'll see how that works out. Harry Wilson started to actually start a little bit for Fulham, and Harry Wilson, I believe, is a former Liverpool player. So we'll see how that works out. And then let's see, not doing terrible for time. And then we'll move on to Newcastle and Southampton. Southampton get the first goal with Stuart Armstrong, and it's Bruno getting caught on the ball. A bit of a surprise. You don't normally see this. Roman Lavia does a really good job to win the ball back off him, and then Alcaraz leads the counter. He found Silvana out wide, who then crosses it in to Armstrong, and then it was 1-0 until I want to say maybe the well, no, actually they scored early. Well, it was 1-0 going into halftime, and then Eddie Howe hooked Anthony Gordon. He moved Alexander Ishak out wide, and unfortunately, this move ended up winning them the game. He brought on Callum Wilson, and Callum Wilson went off. Um, getting a goal to make it 1-1, and then Theo Walcott unfortunately has an own goal on a corner kick to make it 2-0. Callum Wilson had scored a second one before this, but it had been chalked off for offsides, and then Callum Wilson's able to get his second goal a little bit after that to make it 3-1, and he almost scored a little bit towards the end to get his hat trick. Um, I mean, the thing to hear is it wasn't the easiest weeks of Newcastle to manage. With 2 away games after coming up with that monster win over Spurs last weekend, and they couldn't have been more set up for maybe both games to kind of challenge them. And in the end, Fulham and Newcastle, just seem full of belief at the moment. Where even they're down at halftime here. It was only a one goal game at Everton, and both games saw Newcastle just explode in the second half. And similar to what Holland and City have, or City have with Holland and Alvarez. From my from Liverpool perspective at least, it's a shame that it seems like Ishak and Callum Wilson have a similar dynamic where they don't actually harm each other; they complement each other. Um, and that basically seems to be Hal's secret weapon when things aren't necessarily going well. Is he's played them both together. We saw it with Brentford. We saw it versus Everton as well, and we saw it in this game. And it's interesting to see what maybe could have happened if we had seen this, earlier in the season when when Newcastle were actually had that little dip in form, in February. So the interesting thing was, Anthony Gordon did get his first start in a little while, and well, I think he's had a couple starts, but almost every time he's had a start, it has not gone well. Um, I'm trying to think if he started versus Liverpool or not, but he in most of the games that he started versus Aston Villa. I remember that. Yeah, he had a couple of chances in the first half to score, and he ended up hitting his moments wide, and he was getting the better of Lianco because Southampton made some chances as well. Um, Ruben Sellers tried Lianco at right back, and it was a disaster show. Anthony Gordon was looking like Kylian Mbappe a little bit, just trying to be able to get by him in the first half until he got basically close to the goal, and then he turned into I don't know, Dan James or someone that didn't have a finish on him, and it was poor. He was hooked at halftime, and Alexander Isak was really did look like maybe, an Mbappe or someone in the second half. The way he had something like 5 or 6 successful dribbles and was able to set up 2 of these goals. Um, so again, just a master stroke by Eddie Howe. And with Southampton, this is rough. Uh, we'll get to the stats. I mean, it was Newcastle finished with 4.3 xG to Southampton's 1.3. But it was only 0.84 in the first half, and then Newcastle had 22 shots and 5 on target. But again, most of the attempts coming in the second half after Eddie Howe had made that change. Um, 11 corner kicks to 2, 5 big chances for Newcastle, and two Woodwork hit. And then the passing number was a little bit surprising. Newcastle sometimes struggled to pass the ball and keep it a little bit, and they had 400 with 82% accuracy, and then Southampton 200 ish with 70% accuracy. And then I mean, Callum Wilson's impact in the second half really is what won the game, but also moving Ishak out to the wide and not just subbing Callum Wilson for Ishak, actually playing them together. And people can talk about creative midfielders, great people that are great passers of the ball, um, great dribblers. None of it matters if you don't have something that can put chances away. And Callum Wilson has regained his confidence, and some of these aren't really the easiest finishes. I mean, right now Newcastle have 2 forwards that can both create and be reliable in front of the net. Um, and then the finish he had for one of the goals versus Everton in the midweek was unreal too. And I think he scored 8 goals now for April. Um, and it's easy to forget. It's also a good story because Eddie Howe had Callum Wilson. They were both together at Bournemouth when they both got relegated. And then, this was supposed to be a tricky stretch for Newcastle, and all they've done is taken 24 points out of a possible 37 in their last 9 games. And I think I guess the last 10 games, and I think the only losses they've had were Villa and Man City. So, and then with Southampton, you get the first goal, but the way they conceded was really, really sore to see, and they almost looked defeated. Unfortunately, it seems, and when you look at necessarily who they have, at least center back depth, you wouldn't necessarily think that. It was interesting to see Saliso towards the end was kind of shut out for someone like Bednarik. I was a bit surprised by that. We had been seeing Stevens, not Stevens. Um, I guess it was Bednarik. We've seen him kind of move the fullbacks around a little bit, which has been interesting. Sometimes it'll be Peru, sometimes it'll be Kyle Walker Peters or Matt Niles. This time we saw Lianco give a shot, and that didn't necessarily work out. And then we saw Matt Niles come on, and he didn't want to see Alexander Ishak ever again. So that didn't work out either. And it is a shame because I feel like we do have our first one to officially pencil in. Um, I feel like we've Rex and I have already done this a little bit, but they flirted through the years with Hasenhüttl, and he had always found a way to keep them up. But even if they had stuck with him, it's maybe this squad doesn't necessarily have enough because I think it's the youngest squad in the league. But they got lucky last year by getting Broja on loan, and the player but he wasn't really the player that they brought to be Danny Ings' replacement. They sold Danny Ings a couple years ago, and what they did was they brought in Adam Armstrong. That's the person they actually bought, and it just Armstrong hasn't looked at this level. Jay Armstrong has struggled as well, and Alcaraz is doing a decent job for them. But he's not really a striker himself, and he's more of an attacking midfielder. And they just don't have any threat in the box or anyone to basically hold up the play. And I just mentioned talking about Callum Wilson, and just straight up Southampton don't have that player right now. And one thing you can maybe say is if they do go down, one positive could be that they're getting a player back who just played a big role in helping Burnley win promotion, in Nathan Tella, who had 17 goals and 5 assists in the championship this past season, and he's still just 23, and he's got a lot. He's always had a lot of pace to him. He has had a EPL experience, and you don't. He is a lone player, so I don't imagine them necessarily selling him off. So maybe he can help them lead a role in helping them win promotion back in a year from now. It seems it's not necessarily the because of the way like parachute payments work and whatnot. It's not necessarily the death sentence that we've seen. A lot of the teams that have been going down have been finding the way back up recently. Burnley and Sheffield are good examples of that. Fulham last year and Bournemouth last year as well. So um, maybe something to keep in mind. And then we'll move on to Man United and Aston Villa. This one ends 1-0. Frankly, this could have been. I think Man United could have picked their number in the first half because Aston Villa did not really start off that well. Uh, but maybe the way to I guess maybe the famous saying is tale of two halves. Because one note I have here was if anything, I thought the second half Aston Villa were maybe the more superior team, and the second half I put down Victor Lindelof's name a lot. So that maybe says a little bit what happened because he had a big header to stop Watkins. He had a big block to deny Jacob Ramsey. I think this was going on goal, and then he had a clearance off the line to stop Douglas Luiz. So I mean, Aston Villa started this game on cruise control, and Man United. The reason why I said they looked like they could pick the number is Aston Villa were playing a very high defensive line, and Man United were having it was easy for them to just get Rashford, behind it, and Man United weren't necessarily able to get that pass on time. Rashford was offsides too many times, or maybe the pass was overhit. Another thing that was interesting was Emi Martinez was coming out and basically playing sweeper keeper, and Emi Martinez was really busy in that first half. There he had to come off his line at one point. He had to make a save on Rashford, and then there were a couple real chances that Bruno sent in that were dangerous. And that was an interesting thing here to see was how Ten Hag lined up because we saw some changes. Again, we saw Luke Shaw, Lindelof. That is what we've been seeing. But we saw Dallo at right back, not Wan-Bissaka, and then we saw Malacia at left back, and Malacia was playing closer to midfield than necessarily left back. And then we saw Bruno at right wing, which was interesting. We saw Sabitzer and Eriksson kind of played as the two tens. Sancho on the left wing, he's still not necessarily working out. He scored versus Spurs, in the midweek, but I think he's still kind of struggling a little bit. Rashford though at striker is working out. Um, and I think Bruno should be tried at right wing a little bit more. He doesn't maybe he doesn't necessarily have the pace, but almost like when Kevin De Bruyne has been played at right wing, what he can do is he can cut inside, and he has such good delivery from that side. Rashford or whoever is going to benefit from that. And we saw this when Man United played Leicester earlier in the season, and I thought it worked out pretty well. So I've been surprised we haven't seen more of it. And they win the game basically because of this. So. Those were just a couple things that I noticed. For the goal, I mean, Rashford gets behind again. Martinez been sounds and saves it, but the rebound falls to Bruno, who finishes it. But it's interesting because uh, Rashford takes a shot early, and I think that maybe surprised Amy Martinez, and he does bend down and save it, but all he can do is kind of parry it, and then Bruno is able to get it on at the end. But the interesting thing here is I think the shot required a right foot finish, and if Anthony has played at right wing instead, I feel he would have tried to chop this onto his left foot. So again, I think it benefited by playing it by playing Bruno. Um, and then that was maybe kind of it. Uh, the interesting thing was how in the second half you saw how Man United were playing at least in midfield or in defense. It really was kind of just Casemiro a little bit more himself. Malacia was forced to be a little more defending out wide. Eriksson and Sabitzer weren't necessarily doing enough themselves, and all Villa had to do was bypass Casemiro to get some shots off, or to get a run at the back line. And we didn't necessarily see Watkins necessarily influential, but we did see once they were able to at least bypass that first line of pressure. Villa were able to create some chances and did give it a pretty good go in the second half. I mean, they had 7 shots, only one on target. Um, Man United with 14 and 6. Amy had to make 5 saves. Um, I mean, Man United did edge Villa in XG as well. And a clean sheet with the defensive issues that they have is definitely worth celebrating over. Regardless of how ugly it can be. And again, mentioned how I liked Bruno. But another thing I mentioned that's worth saying is because of how you can maybe play Bruno at right wing more. Now maybe he doesn't want to do defensive duties on that side. If you have someone like Aaron Wan-Bissaka at right back, yeah, you can maybe make him more defensive. And Bruno isn't necessarily going to beat anyone for pace or whatnot, but he can be clever on the ball. He can be tricky with it. He can cut inside or go down the wing to get a cross off. So I just think Man United should explore it more. And then it was a big bounce back considering what happened on Thursday. Where on Thursday the back line of Shaw and Lindelof is, it's going to take some time growing pains. That is worth saying. But at least in this game, Lindelof I did think was man of the match. And again with the fullback situation being shuffled, it's really Man United have Brighton now coming up in the league. I think either Sunday or either this Wednesday or Thursday, and Brighton just found their scoring boots. So it's a rematch of the game we just saw for the FA semifinal, and we'll see if it turns out the similar way. Hopefully not, because that was kind of a dull scoreless affair. Um, if Eric Den Hag plays Dallo instead of Aaron Wan-Bissaka, I think someone like Matoma will eat his lunch a little bit. So we'll see how that works out. And then with Aston Villa, something I was texting a buddy of mine is it was maybe it felt like it could maybe be a tryout for Emir Martinez because I kind of feel like David De Gea is maybe close to having his time up. The regardless of how good he can be as an actual keeper when it comes to making saves, it's just he seems he's hit his ceiling when it comes to just his distribution when the ball's at his feet. It's a problem. I mean, and we definitely saw that in Europa with Sevilla. So and I do feel like someone like Martinez, he checks a lot of boxes. He's obviously just won the World Cup with Argentina. It doesn't make sense that he's going to always stay with Aston Villa. He'll probably want to make some kind of move eventually, and he doesn't really have a weakness to his game. So I don't know. I just kind of thought that kind of watching it, and Villa did start off poorly, but if not for Lindelof and maybe Konsa stopping a Ming's effort, this could have actually ended 1-1. So that is worth saying as well. And then and it was kind of it's surprising to see Aston Villa kind of play such a high defensive line, risky in the first half because we saw Man United get like 22 shots versus Everton doing something similar just a couple of weeks ago. But anyways, and then we'll move on to Leicester and Everton. This was a barn burner of a game, ending 2-2. This was wild, and not in a way I was expecting. Um, Usually, when you have these like 6 pointers, where I mean, it basically felt like a final. And sometimes these can be really dull, and this was anything but. I mean, Calvert Lewin was back, and basically, you saw what how important he can be. He doesn't necessarily score himself. He scores the PK, but he doesn't score an open goal himself. But what he was constantly being a pest and constantly being in the box, and all this just comes from Everton floating a ball into the box, and that's what draws the PK. And then Sorrento was able to get one to draw it level. I mean, Leicester did not start off the game well. That is worth saying as well. And then Vardy was able to get Leicester the lead. And then Iwobi was able to draw one back to make it 2-2. I mean, this game was bonkers. There was enough action in the first half to honestly be a full game by itself, with the number of chances and just changes things were happening. Uh, because right after Vardy had gotten the second goal, it looks like Everton had a chance to just Calvert Lewin had a tap in, and he mishit it, and then just immediately following that, Leicester were able to get Vardy in behind Leicester's back line, and Vardy was able to get around the keeper, but his chip was a little too high, and it just hit the post. And then right before the end of the first half, Leicester were able to get a PK. And the interesting thing here was it was Madison that took it, not Vardy. And another thing that was interesting was you see Pickford actually looking at or having a drink of his water bottle before the PK, and some camera angle on Sky was able to see that on the water bottle you actually saw that a little pictograph that said it had three potential three PK takers. So it was Madison, Vardy, and Tielemans, and you actually see with Madison it was something like 65%. He goes in the middle, and he even had like a little note basically saying "stay," and that's what Pickford does, and he's able to stop the PK, and that is maybe the way to basically start with this game is it was at Leicester. You have to feel like Leicester are the one that are upset about this. It was a weird take that I had is because of the way that this game started. Is it was weird how Leicester were not more ahead, and it was also weird how Everton were not either level or ahead themselves. It was a bonkers game. How that happened, and then the the thing that showed up as well was we saw a bit of a lineup change. We saw, Leicester trying a 4-3-3, and the right side I thought was a little vulnerable with Tielemans and Madison on the same side. We ended up actually seeing a bit of a change when Daka came on, which I think helped. But with Everton, was interesting to see James Garner get a start, um, and we that actually think that worked out a little bit. I don't necessarily know if it will because if Garner's starting, that means Onana is sitting on the bench. I don't necessarily know if that is that what they want? But just it seemed Everton, Garner was good at getting the ball quickly out of his feet and trying to get the ball forward. I mean, it wasn't the prettiest game, but sometimes they don't really have passers in that midfield, and Garner at least can maybe offer that. I don't necessarily think Onana should be sacrificed. I think maybe Idrissa Gueye should. But anyways, this was bonkers. I mean, the XG for both was 3.4 to 3.3, and I think that's the highest XG I think I've seen all season, but between two sides combined. I mean, Leicester had 15 shots and 6 on target. Everton was 23 and 8. And then possession was Leicester had a little bit more of the possession, but um, these stats were telling too. So 23 of 62 for long balls versus 21 of 67 for Leicester. And then crosses, Everton was 7 of 38. So I think that's where the Calvert-Lewin effect comes through. And then Leicester were 3 of 11. It's a different thing with Vardy. But really the main thing too was Iverson had 6 saves and Pickford 3 saves himself and a PK save. I mean, both keepers were really worked. Both keepers were really man of the match. So starting with Leicester, Iverson kept them in the game. So that's the reason why you were like, I was thinking, it's interesting Everton haven't scored more, and also interesting how Leicester haven't necessarily scored more. I mean, both keepers. I mean, this game could have been really anything. If either keeper had been a little bit off, and then Vardy was big when they needed him to be, but I also think he showed a little rust when with that miss, and it is only a point taken, and it's a home game, so this is still maybe a missed opportunity. And one thing I wanted to ask Rex about with Sorincho gets the important first goal is it was interesting to see why he wasn't being played. I figured maybe it was a fitness issue, and it seemed club owners were trying to sell him earlier in the year, and maybe they have an agreement to with they said Atletico Madrid in the broadcast, and it's almost like they were protecting the sell-on value. But it's not that doesn't really help you when if you get relegated. So all of a sudden we started to see him back into the 11, and he hasn't been bad. Him and Faze aren't. It's not necessarily great. Obviously, Iverson was forced into making monster saves, um, but he definitely seems better than Suter. So that I just thought that was interesting, and I mean, Leicester are on 30 points now, and their next game is Fulham, so they still have an opportunity here. They have to win that game though, because the game after that it's home to Liverpool. Maybe they can get something with Liverpool struggling away from home this year. Away to Newcastle, there's no chance with that one. No one's getting points at St James's other than maybe Arsenal. We'll have to see. And then they have West Ham to end the season. So we'll see. We'll see where West Ham is at the end of the year as well. I mean, that could be that's a monster game between both of them. And maybe a winkle here is Leicester will know where they'll be in the table before every game they play because basically for 4 weeks in a row they'll be playing on Monday, which is a bit kind of weird. And then with Everton, you get Kevin Lewin back, and you can see what a role he had plays for both goals. But he also showed some rust. He had that constant miss. Obviously, Pickford gives you a big bonus with the save, and I did think James Garner played well. But something I was thinking about is Shandaich has Yuri Mina fit now, and I don't get why he's still playing Michael Keane. He saved him for Spurs, but he's still Keane and Tarkowski. I think he's too slow of a duo, and to be honest, it would be interesting to see how that injury to Seamus Coleman maybe affects the team because he was the captain. I didn't necessarily think he was playing well, but that's not necessarily easy to lose your captain to possibly a career-ending injury, especially if it's a leg breaker at his age. So we'll see how they bounce back from that. But I mean, just the fact that this game was played at Leicester's ground and not Everton's, I think that is a positive to at least get something. And then, coming down the stretch, I think one thing I wanted to say is it looks like between Everton, Leeds, and Leicester, and maybe Forest, it's going to come down to who can win 2 games. Maybe 2 games at home. Um, Everton's next 2 games are rough with Brighton and Man City, but then they end with Wolves and Bournemouth. So there's potential to get 6 points, and if they can do that, they can finish on 35. 35, I think, would be enough. But I mean, the roster isn't necessarily stacked, and the thing I wanted to ask Rex is, has Dash really improved Everton? Now, they did just have 25 or so shots, so that's maybe not necessarily the best thing to say. They've obviously improved with getting Calvert-Lewin back. But I think it's been maybe a missed opportunity to not see more of Maupay playing with Calvert-Lewin or Calvert-Lewin playing with Ellis Sims. Uh, Maybe finding a way to play Damari Gray on a wing to maybe create something. He can be a wide player and maybe float something in for Calvert Lewin. Um, and the decisions to ice out Patterson and Yuri Mina for Keane and Coleman, I think, has been kind of weird too. So also, yeah, I don't really understand why the club sold Anthony Gordon in the winter. Now, I shouldn't say that because selling him for 40 million when he's maybe not valued that much, that makes sense. But not bringing a replacement in has been weird. Just to make a comparison, Bournemouth brought Django Ouattara for 20 million. So and that's that's probably going to be what saves them up compared to Everton. So, and I know they did try to get Danjuma. Spurs beat them at the last second, but trying is not good enough. They easily could have done more, or they could have if they didn't have someone to replace Gordon in, they should have kept him because they don't really have the squad to lose a player like that. And Gordon hasn't necessarily worked out with Newcastle, so that's kind of been a negative for both clubs, you could say. And then we move on to Bournemouth and Leeds. This was a monster game for Bournemouth, and things were interesting, at least, at halftime. I think it was only a 1-0 game. And then, or maybe it was it 2-1? Might have been 2-1. Yes, that's right, because Bournemouth got off to a early two goal start. A goal from Lerma, and then Lerma again after Leeds can't defend a corner kick, and then Bamford's able to get one to make it a 1-goal game after a good cross in by Nato, and then Solanke and Anthony Semenyo at the very end. But the thing that I wanted to touch on here is this game was like of a revenge for Bournemouth in a way because when these two teams played before the World Cup, it was maybe the most exciting game of the whole season, to be honest. And because it ended like 4-3, with I think Leeds won at the very very last second with like a Somerville goal, and we still saw a team score 4 goals in this game. It was just not Leeds this time. And in Bournemouth, I think Bournemouth have done enough to stay up. And as 39, 40, I think is actually like mathematically. I don't see any of these teams at the bottom even getting close to 35 or 36. So it's fantastic job by Gary Cooper, which I think we've already said that, but um, the story really is Leeds here because Leeds somewhat played a decent game defensively versus Leicester, and it was a missed opportunity because they had the first goal versus Leicester, and then we saw we saw Javier Garcia change things up here. He went to a back three playing Christensen, Robin Koch, and Liam Cooper. And then it was Ailing and Harrison as the wingbacks. This did not work out at all. Harrison isn't really a wingback by trade, anyways. And at least when you play as wingbacks, you're supposed to be some kind of defensive cover. And Harrison was trying to get into the box, way too attack minded. Nanto wasn't running back to offer defensive help either. And Liam Cooper just doesn't have the legs. So way too often, Watatara was having way too much fun for free down that side. And then Christensen, I think Christensen has been at left back most games. I can't remember him being a center back. And Ailing, I'm surprised he got another game after he was really poor versus Crystal Palace. And then after that, I think we saw Christensen versus Liverpool. So I mean, Leicester's back line has been an issue the entire season. So a lot of fans have been wondering, why hasn't Bamford played more, or why haven't we seen Nanto more? Um, missing Tyler Adams as well. But in a number of these goals, all Bournemouth was doing was sending a ball long for like Philip Billing to win the air, and Leeds back three were not able to handle that, or going long and finding Watatara completely free with no one around him. And so what's going to happen is Leeds, if Leeds do go down, and I do think they will be a team that goes down, it's going to be because they didn't address that back line, and so unfortunately. But to touch on some of the goals, the first goal it comes from Lerma, but and Leeds did start the game off well. They had a couple chances to test Neto, but Bamford has a weak shot here, and it's the last time that Leeds touched the ball. So Bamford needs to do better to maybe force a better save, or maybe force a corner kick or something. But both Nato and Harrison have overcommitted to get into the box, and the weak shot allows Bournemouth the freedom to attack on that wing side where there's just no one there, and that's where Neto goes with the ball. Bournemouth then move the ball upfield, Leeds sitting back, and then it's just one long ball by Kelly that beats him. Billing beats Cooper in the air, wins it, gets it to Solanke, and then Solanke does a really good job to get to the side and then send a cross off that um, I think it first finds someone, and I think Cooper actually blocks it. It finds Billing. Billing has a shot blocked, but no one's able to get the rebound, and the rebound just falls to Lerma. But the thing that I noticed here was when you watch the replay, McKinney and Ailing are just watching. Eiling is supposed to be wing back, and he's supposed to do some kind of defensive duties, and he's just standing still. And McKinney is too late to run to maybe stop Limmer's block. So it was poor, but I think from both of them. And then for the second goal, again, it's mostly just a corner kick. But the thing to focus on was before the corner kick. um, let's see what happened. Before the corner kick, it's Senese is able to escape pressure and it's just able to run upfield. I think it's like a give and go, and he sends a cross in that finds no one, but Watatara gets the ball, and then that's what blocks it off. But the corner kick comes from Christensen and Ailing being clueless and being too high upfield, and it's a simple give and go with Senese and I think it's like Jack Rothwell for a center back to get behind your back line. And so, yeah, it was shambolic by Leeds. Um, and then, the third goal was also told the story as well because it's another goal with a simple long ball over the top. This time by the keeper. The keeper just looks up, finds Watatara upfield. He's able to get behind the back line, and then it's just a simple square pass. He's able to find it to Solanke. And at this point, Kiefer Moore has come on, and Kiefer Moore is drawing the attention, and no one is marking Solanke, who's making a run kind of behind him. And Solanke kind of intercepts the ball and then has a really good finish. But Leeds having to chase the game, I understand, but and playing so you understand them playing a high defensive line, but it's shambolic to be beaten by a long ball just from the keeper. And again, that kind of just says that really does says it all. I mean, the thing that pops up after every kind of stat has been Leeds being super super poor defensively, and a number of these are just long balls over the top. You can. There's been talks about they've missed Tyler Adams. Maybe Tyler Adams would have helped them in possession, but it's not necessarily the midfield, the defensive cover where they've been hurt. It's especially been the poor center backs and fullbacks, and they've had the worst defensive league record going into the league, and give up 4 goals in probably a must win game. Um, so that wasn't really surprising. And then I'll get to Leeds a little bit later on, but the main thing to touch on with Bournemouth is, I mean, Tavernier got the goal last week, and or he got the goal versus Southampton to win them. That was a big game too because the game was only 1-0. It was a really big 3 points, and this one on top of that again gets them to 39. But what's wild is so Watatara comes on and steps up from the bench. When things aren't necessarily working out, O'Neill hasn't been afraid to make changes. And we saw that in this game. We saw Kiefer Moore come on. We saw Anthony come on and had an assist late. Watatara was a late sub versus Spurs a couple of weeks ago. And Tavernier came on versus Fulham as a sub. And Ryan Christie came on versus Fulham a couple of weeks ago as a sub. And both of them got the 2 goals that helped them beat Fulham in a big game that kind of changed their fortunes. And this is a side that gave up 9 goals to Liverpool, sacked their manager 3 games into the season. The manager went public saying he didn't think the team was good enough to stay up. And I was certainly guilty of this. I pegged them to go down. And here they are on 39 points, tied with Chelsea. And it's a remarkable job that Gary O'Neill has done. I think they can pop the champagne, as they say. And I do think I said it tongue in cheek last week. I think he would be my manager of the year. Just the way how he's been able to just change opinions of some of these players. Because you look at the squad, and the names don't really pop up at you. And the way he's kind of again he's made important and impactful second half decisions that's directly led to them winning games, and they've won 6 of the last 9 games, and that's going to be the reason why they stay up. And then with with Leeds, the Leeds actually did look pretty good in attack, but it's too little, too late, I think, because it's not necessarily the scoring part. They can maybe get back to doing what they were doing with Beasley, trying to win games 4-3, because Somerville and Nanto looked pretty good. Obviously. Bamford, Bamford, I think is rusty, but Bamford can put some goals away. And they have Rodrigo to come on. But it's been interesting to see. Neither coach has known what to do with Rodrigo or Jorginho Rutter, or Bamford. And the thing that probably stings for Leeds is the dropped opportunity was Leicester. Because Bamford had a big miss there. There was also a chance. Leicester were forced to kind of really uh, uh, really go and try to get a tying goal in that second half. So and they were playing with Madison basically as right wing, in that game, and Madison wasn't doing any kind of defensive work. So there was a chance to maybe try to get something over the top to at least push either punish Leicester's back line or at least make them think about that. And instead, Gracia brought on Brendan Aronson, who's more of a ball to feet kind of player, and number 10, and he lost the ball a lot when someone like Nanta would have made more sense. So there was a missed opportunity there. Obviously, Sinistera would have helped in that role, and they missed him for injury. But yeah, everything is about the back line, and it's also Melee has had a number of goals from his mistakes as well, and he's young, he can be talented. I think he actually was France's U21 keeper at one point. But it is interesting to me that they never tried to improve there. I mean, to draw a comparison, Nottingham Forest went and got Keylor Navas in January. Everton have England's national keeper in Pickford, just by comparison. And then, I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago or last week. It's crazy to me that they sent Diego Llorente on loan to Roma. Just because you have Liam Cooper in waiting, that's not a reason to be like, oh, well, we're not going to be able to play you anymore. And it was also weird to see them spin big on Jorginho Rudder. And maybe he helps them, maybe he kills it in the championship and helps them win promotion next year. But when you, again, to use Forest as comparison, what did Forest do? They went to Atletico Madrid and brought Felipe to their squad, who's actually been pretty good for them. He's had a good run of games. And then the last thing to say is they conceded 5 to Palace, 6 to Liverpool. They drew Leicester 1-1, and then they gave up 4 to Bournemouth in a must-win game. And another thing that's worth saying is in all of those games, it was a one-goal game, heading into halftime or I guess starting the second half. So whatever Gracia has been telling his players to do, maybe his pep talks or halftime tweaks, has not worked. It's made them worse. And Leeds' schedule is brutal. It's Man City and Newcastle back to back, and then it's West Ham and then Spurs. And so maybe you can beat West Ham, but if you only beat West Ham, you're on 33 points alone. Um, and West Ham themselves are already on 34. And so you imagine they're gonna need at least a win and maybe a draw minimum, maybe 2 draws, or maybe 2 wins. And I that's why I kind of think 35 is probably safety at this point because it requires a win and 2 draws, and it's hard to see these teams winning at the bottom 2, pulling off 2 wins. To be honest, that would get them to 36. Everton would get to 35. Um, let's see. Everton have Man City and Brighton, but then the 2 doables. Even if they only beat one of Wolves and Bournemouth, if they can get a draw, that can get them to 34. But at least at 34 points, I think you force Leeds and Forest and Leicester to do something themselves. Leicester are an interesting situation because they have Fulham. If they beat Fulham, they can get to 33 points. And then you have Liverpool, Newcastle, which aren't necessarily great, and then you end with West Ham. So at least you can maybe control your fate that way. West Ham have if they beat Leeds, I think they're safe. They're on 30. They're on 34 to get to 37. That's probably enough. Because I don't think Forest or Everton can get anywhere near that. And then they have the best goal differential. And then Forest are unique as well because they have Southampton next on the schedule. If they can get a win there, that gets them to 33 as well. And it's not the worst schedule to end with for Southampton. They have Chelsea coming up with nothing to play for. Away to Palace isn't a fun game, but it's not necessarily great. And getting Arsenal, one thing I was thinking about that I wanted to ask Rex is them getting Arsenal is interesting, and I guess we'll get to Palace a little bit later on. Um, uh, you could maybe see that being a similar game to what the Liverpool and Forest game was, where it's just a really frustrating game. Forest just kind of sitting back. Maybe Forest are going to have long throw-ins to torment someone like Rob Holding. It'll be interesting to see if Arsenal aren't able to get Saliba back because in that situation. Um, you know, Arsenal will probably have like 80% of the ball, but that could be especially the second game of the year, second to last game of the season. Arsenal would go into that game with a lot of pressure. So that one's not necessarily done and dusted either. But speaking of Nottingham Forest, we'll move on to Brentford and Nottingham Forest. They get the first goal with Danilo. This game did not have a ton of it until the end. And then at the end got a little interesting. But Yeah, Danilo gets the first goal. It's more long and throw in fun. The ball finds Gibbs White. His shot is blocked, but then the rebound falls to Danilo, who puts it away. And then after Brentford had just majority of the ball, which they normally don't do, Forest were just sitting in a shell, frustrating the hell out of Brentford and Brentford players, Brentford fans at the stadium, and really anyone watching the game. And then Kiriate makes two bad mistakes here. He's at fault for the foul, and then is an even Tony free kick, and Danilo is in the wall, and he moves, and he creates a little space in the wall, and Tony's able to get a ball that flits through that wall and is able to beat Keylor Navas, and makes it 1-1. And then after about 5 minutes to go into extra time, uh, Danilo ended up trying to go for a loose ball and ended up kind of pulling his hamstring or ended up hurting himself, and that forced Nottingham Forest to play the final like 5-ish minutes or so down a man, and Brentford are able to get the final goal from Josh Da Silva, and really the mistake comes from Raymond Lodi, allowing Da Silva space to go into the box and to get a shot away. So it's poor there. You have to know to not let someone cut inside you. If you let someone go to the byline and get a cross off, that's not your problem. But he allows to get, Da Silva to cut inside him and to square up and get a shot with his left foot. And he's able to fit a little gap in that beats Keylor Navas. But um, I mean, the match recap is I was enjoying Brighton during the first half, but after they got the six, I switched over, and this game wasn't really good on the eye. Um, the but and the stats kind of show it as well. I mean, it was Brentford with 1.6 xG, Forest 0.7. Brentford did have 14 shots and 8 on target. Forest just 5 and 3, and that's similar to what we saw last week with Liverpool. Brentford having 69% of the ball. I can't remember the last time that Brentford kept the ball versus anyone. I mean, just Forest were poor, and Forest with 174 passing. It's almost 100 more passes than we saw last week. So a little improvement there, and then. This stat was telling as well. Brentford were 8 of 32 crosses. So they Brentford did not have a way to necessarily break through Forest's really deep block. All they were doing was crossing the ball to Ivan Toney, and it wasn't really working. Forest were 2 of 6 by comparison, and they had 41 clearances to Brentford's 5. Um, but the interesting, yeah, unfortunately, Brentford were able to win, and it's on the back of beating Chelsea as well. But it was interesting to see, and without Norgard is worth saying as well. But I don't really like it when Brentford actually do play 4-3. It seems they're trying to fit Damsgaard. They're trying to find a spot for Damsgaard. I think Damsgaard would actually work as a 10, especially when you have a team that's playing so deep, so back like that. Maybe having a different role would fit him. It seems that they're struggling to find a creator because you don't want Tony to necessarily be that. You don't want Tony to drop back and do what Kane does for Spurs because I feel like Tony can do that. Tony's much better at kind of being a threat into the box. But this game was really more about Forest because there was a chance here. And one thing I was texting my buddy Jeremy is I don't really want this style of football to be rewarded. However, since they've changed to basically just playing, Tony, I call it the T word, Tony Pulis ball, because they're sitting super back. They aren't using fullbacks at all. They're playing in a shell, and they're fine with having 20-30% of the ball, not having many shots. Any kind of opportunities they're getting are from set pieces, and that said, they're playing this way. It is hard to break them down. And if you think about it, it's someone like Felipe and Keylor Navas are probably more dependable finding a way to scrap a clean sheet than Everton's backline and Leeds. So that is worth saying as well. And they had a 5 point gap for most of March, but now they're chasing. But the schedule isn't terrible. Again, the game versus Southampton is doable. It's a must. But then it's Chelsea. Chelsea don't really have anything to play for now, and then Arsenal at home. And then I mentioned Palace. And one thing I did want to ask Rex about is that Arsenal game could give him heartburn because Forest will play with 10 men behind the ball, and the few chances they'll get it will just be long throw-ins. It'll be a long throw-in chaos ball, and without Saliba, that could maybe be problematic. But anyways, we only got 2 games left, and let's see how we're doing for time. Oh, not terrible. And then Brighton and Wolves. This one was the shock because out of nowhere, Brighton found the scoring boots. Dennis Undev gets us off, and then Pascal Gross gets two, and then Welbeck gets two, and then Undev finishes with a hat trick with a really cheek finish. But I mean, this game is towards the end and it doesn't need much big picture because it feels like Wolves look safe and they played like it. But and Brighton don't really have their Europe hopes necessarily dashed. They I think they have 2 games in hand on Liverpool, but the 2 games are Newcastle and I think, it's Newcastle, it's Arsenal, and it's Man City. But they also have Man United. So if Brighton can get through that, they actually can maybe control their fate and finish 5th, or they can finish above Liverpool. Things aren't necessarily out of it yet. And, the wild thing is Brighton did this making 5 changes, which I wasn't expecting. Alexis and Casado were rested for Billy Gilmore. Mitoma was rested for Incensio. And, man, did this really work out. I do wanna touch on some of the details, for these goals because they were really good. I mean, for the first goal, I mean, Brighton just start with the ball with their 2 center backs, and Webster just finds, Dunk, and then, Dunk gets it up wide to Estupiñán, and then passes it to Asensio or Enciso. And then he plays, Estupiñán making an overlap run behind him, and then Estupiñán, floats a ball over everyone in the box. But Wolves can't get the loose ball, and then Veltman gets it and fires in a low ball towards Welbeck, and Welbeck immediately just, just tries to flick it into a danger area, and it finds Undev for the, first time touch. But the interesting thing here was Veltman was back. That allowed Gross to play more in midfield, and man, did that really work out. Um, for the Because he gets the second goal, Mateus Nunes loses the ball. He did not have necessarily the best of games. By Mateus Nunes losing the ball, Semedo isn't ready for that, and he's too far upfield. The fullback, he's expecting maybe Wolves to have possession, maybe start an attack, and once you lose the ball, that allows Brighton to counter on that side, and that's what they do. Billy Gilmore does a really good job to win the ball and immediately get the ball to Enciso, who makes a run down the wing, and then both Wolves defenders follow Undev's run, which leaves Pascal Gross unmarked on the other side. And Enciso has a clever ball that finds Gross, and then it's a fantastic finish by Gross. And again, this happened. This happened just with Wolves having being really poor on the ball. And then the third goal comes from a fantastic finish by Gross. I mean, this was class everywhere. I mean, let's see. The play starts with Billy Gilmore being clever and making the right read on the situation. So he heads a loose ball to Pascal Gross, and then Pascal Gross carries it upfield where Wolves is supposed to have maybe Neves or Nunez or maybe Lerma, and they're nowhere for some reason. And then Gross plays it to Enciso, who cuts inside and passes it to Gross, and it's a fantastic outside the boot effort, almost like a volley outside the box, and it goes in. And, the interesting thing watching this was why didn't Mateus Cunha play? Lopetegui changed the shape, and it really maybe to try to fit another midfielder on, and it didn't work out. But the fourth goal kind of told the story as well because it's just an Estupiñán cross, and Welbeck beats Max Kilman in the air to score it. But again, Brighton win the ball back by Wolves just gave them the ball away, and they were sloppy the entire first half. And usually, one thing you say when you watch Wolves is sometimes they can't score, but usually they're pretty good on the ball. And a lot of this was just not even Brighton necessarily pressing them into danger, just Wolves being really bad on the ball. And then the fifth goal, this goal comes from Adam Webster kind of carrying the ball upfield into space, and then fires a hard pass on the ground, near the box that finds Enciso. Enciso tries to do a clever touch. It doesn't come off, but the rebound finds Welbeck, and it's a really good finish. And then for the sixth goal, Jose Sa didn't have the best game, either saving the ball or with his distribution. He had a pass that basically went right to Welbeck in the first half, and Welbeck kind of hit it over the bar. And he wasn't able to get lucky this time, where basically it's a poor pass, early on, and I think into reads it, intercepts it, and immediately does a cheek finish, chip finish into the empty net. I mean, Brighton 22 shots and 8 on target. And we didn't see this first Man United, but before that, we'd been seeing this. We saw this for Chelsea. We saw this for Spurs. We saw this first Brentford, where Brighton were just really, really cooking. And the 3 point something XG. The Wolves just didn't really show up. But Wolves didn't show up. Brighton still had to finish these chances. And in so many of these games, That hasn't always been the case, and man, did they have their shooting boots in this game. But really, when I get guilty of this too because you talk about how Brighton play with their midfield. Everything they do starts with their two passing center backs. And they're two of the best in England at the moment in Dunk and Webster. Now, a lot of the Serbian system makes it easy for them because they have more options. But it also it forces them to make the right decisions, and it also forces them to make decisions under pressure. It almost seems like De Zerbi wants to bait teams to come press them, and so sometimes center backs aren't really good at that. Both Webster and Dunk do or are. And, both are playing at a level where, Levy Colwell can't even get in the side, anymore, and Levy Colwell was playing well, to start out the season, and, or at least after the World Cup. And, both are 90% passing accuracy in, every single game, but another thing too was, no Caseta, no Alexis. What happened? Pascal Gross and Billy Gilmore. You almost forget how good and young Billy Gilmore is. Now his size will always be an issue, so he can't necessarily, they can't, sell Casado and then make Billy Gilmore like, that kind of player, but Billy Gilmore making the right passing and making the right passes under pressure. And he's finding stuff out of his feet quickly and getting it forward. And he had 95 or 93% pass accuracy. And then Enciso made you almost forget about Matoma, almost, not necessarily. And Welbeck made you almost forget about Evan Ferguson. I mean, there's still no Evan Ferguson here, and you're only going to add him. And then with Pascal Gross, he's maybe the unsung hero. Sometimes he can play right back when they need him to. But with Alexis and Casado, they sometimes get more of the headlines, and you can almost forget how good Pascal Gross can be, especially when giving a more offensive minded role. And man, did he look good in this game as well? I mean, the only negative I put down for Brighton is they didn't score 10 because it looked like Wolves have given up, and maybe Brighton could have really put on a number on them. Because I think Welbeck's sixth goal came almost like 50, 55 minutes or 60 minutes into the game, and yeah, I mean, Wolves was just straight up bad. So that is a lot of it. But again, so many times you need to have someone that can finish chances. Like that's the issue Brighton had when they were with Potter. They would play clever football, create chances, and they wouldn't necessarily put them away. And I am curious if maybe De Zerbi had them doing some drills after the Man United and Forest game, because all of them looked really confident in front of goal in a way we didn't necessarily see just last week versus Man United. And then they do have a rematch this coming up with Man United, which we'll see. And then with Wolves, it's just this was a mesh. The midfield didn't necessarily work out. Mateus Nunes was asked to play like three different positions. He was a midfielder, he was a winger, he was a right back at one point. And that was just not necessarily great. Mario Lemena was really pouring the ball in a way we weren't really expecting. And just everything, you're playing Diego Costa and you weren't able to necessarily get him the ball, and he was almost hurting you because he wasn't able to press and win the ball back himself. So again, it maybe just kind of wasn't the game for Wolves. I am surprised we didn't see Mateus Cunha. I thought he was very good versus Leicester. And that is all to say about Wolves. Maybe it's a one-off. Maybe they've already phoned it in. Maybe they but yeah, I don't really have any analysis to say about them. And then I'll move on to West Ham and Crystal Palace. This game was wild on the scoreline, but it was also what would be the saying? A mirage, because West Ham were thoroughly outplayed. I mean, they did get 3 goals, but 3 goals came from set pieces. Crystal Palace were not able to defend, Thomas Suchek on corner kicks, and Suchek does get the first goal from a corner kick. But really, the game really was about Palace and how good they actually looked, how attacking free they looked. And another thing that was interesting too was we saw Zaha back, and Roy had Zaha, I think, when he was coaching them the first time, but he didn't have Eze or Elise, and he didn't have someone like even someone a defensive minded midfielder like Decore, who looks quite good on the ball as well. But Palace started off well, but they conceded the first goal to Suchek. But another thing that was interesting was see Andre Ayew tried at striker. Sometimes he'd basically been playing on the wing side in Zaha's stead. So we saw Andrew Ayew tried out, not necessarily Edouard, and this was a genius move by Roy Hodgson. The first goal comes from Ayu making a really good run into the box and Elise slipping a nice ball in for him. Um, and then the second goal is really good as well because it's good play by Aliso and Ayu. And the ball crosses the goal, and it finds Zaha back post. But it starts with a simple long ball. Emerson can't really deal with Elise, and Eze help Palace win the ball back. Eze passes it to Elise, and then Elise does really well to hold on to the ball into the box. And this little hesitation allows Ayu to catch up and be in the 6 yard area where that's where Eze looks or that's where Elise looks to cross it. Ayu's flick misses the goal, but Zaha is able to be on the far post unmarked and able to get it in the net. Um, One thing we're saying is Abangna is in the game at this point because Kurtzema had to go out for injury, and he doesn't engage in Elise, and I think that's what allows the cross to happen. So it's poor by Agbana here. And then let's see what I have. The third goal comes from just West Ham just being really really sloppy. I mean, Schlupp just kicked the ball off Suchek after pressing him, and basically Suchek in on goal, and he's able to finish it. And then, right when it seemed like Palace were about to go riot, about to do what they did versus Leeds a couple weeks ago, um, West Ham also get a corner kick, and Suchek, who scored the first goal, was at fault for Palace's third, is able to make amends because he has a really good. He wins the first header, kind of flicks it across goal that Antonio is able to score in. And at halftime, it was 3-2, and my thought was, how is this 3-2? Palace are outplaying West Ham but off the pitch. And then Palace kind of get a little lucky for the fourth goal, and this is what basically wins them the game because Eze goes down. Aguirre is basically holding on to his shirt, but it's really, really soft. But the thing to touch on here is it's really good play by Ayu and Eze. So they link up well most of the game, and then they link up well here as well. It's just a give and go, top of the box, but it's really good pass and movement by both of them, and that happens before Eze is able to get into the box. Eze is running onto a ball that Ayu has passed to him, and that's the reason why his shirt is somewhat getting pulled. But a theme here is similar with what happened with Suchek. Is a guard is maybe at fault for the PK. He's able to make amends as well by immediately getting a goal for West Ham to make it a 1 goal game, and just from there, West Ham were not able to really do much. Um, I mean, the West Ham did have 8 shots and 4 on target. Palace was 16 and 6, 3 big chances apiece. But the interesting thing is neither keepers really worked. And then Crystal Palace having 60% possession. Now West Ham don't like playing with the ball, anyways. But Palace were dangerous with that possession because it almost seemed like Roy Hodgson had told his attacking players, "Hey, go have fun. Go out and take players on." And that's what we really saw. Let's see what did I have. Um, one of the interesting facts about Palace's 3 wins in a row is it happened with Zaha being out, but you can see Zaha makes them better. And one thing I was thinking about is because he's always looking to take play people on 1v1. He makes runs in behind. He has a finish on him and can like a play. And I was wondering, it's interesting, hindsight 2020. If maybe Spurs made a mistake by targeting Richarlison and maybe not necessarily Zaha. Because I mean, Richarlison finally got a goal for Spurs, but I think he went the whole season without necessarily netting for them. Um, but I mean that is that can be up for debate, discussion, later on. I mean, Roy Hodgson has come in, and again, I mentioned how he maybe had Zaha last time out, but he also had a team with like 12 out of contract players. When Vieira took over the squad, everyone that was like on it, but Zaha had left. And so maybe the negative football was more a reflection of where the squad was capable of doing. Now, Hodson's England wasn't necessarily great on the eye either, but it seems like he's gone out and told his creative players, go out and express yourself on the ball. Don't worry to take a chance here and there. Get the ball upfield to the attacking players, and it's worked out. And bringing him in has been wild. It's not something that I was expecting. I was kind of making fun of it when he was appointed. I was actually kind of shocked that Vieira was let go. But they did not look like this under Vieira. So the only change really was playing Eze because Eze was getting on the bench. And it wasn't necessarily that playing Zaha added to this because Zaha was injured for most of that stretch. So I mean they've come on and they've won 4 games out of the last 6 by making that change, and by doing that they've kept themselves to safety for another year. And then with West Ham, the thing to touch on here is they're on 34 points. and it was a missed opportunity here because you probably need at least a draw at a minimum because teams can pass you a little bit here, and the schedule isn't really kind. It's the two Manchester clubs back to back, and then it's Brentford in between two Conference League semifinals, and they're taking these semifinals seriously for some reason. So, an injury to Declan Rice and Antonio Bowen, and this gets rough because the two games they end with are Leeds and Leicester. So 2 teams that you're going up against. So if you allow them to get 3 points on you, I mean, there's a 6 pointers in both of them. So, I mean, the wild card is how seriously do they take Conference League? Because it seems like they've been trying to win it. And, I mean, this could still be tricky for West Ham, which is wild because it felt like they had maybe done enough, but it doesn't seem like it. And, well, that's it. That's the show. I need to get better at trying to run these down. Arsenal and Chelsea play today. One thing I wanted to ask Rex is, I mean, Chelsea is such a mess. As Laqueta is starting at right wing back, no Reece James, no Mount. Maybe you like your chances. And but the fun thing another thing to talk about was Aubameyang came on in the second half, and actually he, he was rusty, but he at least gave Chelsea a target man. He gave them something to work off, and I just think it would be kind of funny. I don't necessarily think Chelsea's going to win today. I think it'd be really funny if Aubameyang ends up netting a little bit versus Arteta today. Just to kind of see, just as a neutral, to see the kind of reaction, especially if it's a close game, if it's maybe not necessarily the game winner, but if it just if it's still in the balance and he nets with them, I want to see that celebration because after watching how that all or nothing worked out, they actually had an episode devoted to Aubameyang and Arteta, and there were some things kind of said, but between the two of them. So when Arsenal and Chelsea played in the earlier in the season, it was before the World Cup. Arsenal won, I think, 1-0 in a really ugly game, and Aubameyang actually started that day, and he had something like only 8 or 12 touches the whole game. I remember actually being like, "Oh, this is probably his last game," because it was so bad. So it'll be interesting. There's a lot of reasons for him to be motivated to change that, and before Chelsea. He looked decent versus Brentford, and the game that Chelsea played in before Brentford. I'm trying to remember, but struggling. He came on as a sub and actually didn't look terrible in that game either. I can't remember. So anyways, that's what I'll be looking forward to, and that'll be our show. We'll maybe have Rex to talk on what he thinks of the game on Friday, and maybe what he thought about with Arsenal and Man City, and we'll see how that goes. So that's it. That's our show, and want to thank you guys for listening, and for us two at the Reserve Squad, you stay squatty and stop recording.